The Jansen family appeared to be a loving and supportive unit, like many other families. However, one day, everything changed dramatically. An unexpected event occurred in their home. This incident triggered a chain of events that devastated the family and shocked those around them. Law enforcement, friends, neighbors all sought to understand how this seemingly perfect family could unravel what actually happened behind closed doors. In the dense forests of British Columbia, Randy Jansen led an ordinary life in a small town called Langley. Known for its brick storefronts and cozy coffee shops, Langley was viewed as a peaceful haven. Randy experienced years of hard work and unfulfilled dreams that often brought him unhappiness. From a young age, Randy had a strong bond with his father, who worked at a local lumber mill. His father taught him the skills of woodworking. After graduating high school, Randy followed in his father's footsteps by securing a job at the same mill. The job was tough, requiring long hours and significant physical effort, but Randy was used to hard work. In Langley, the lumber mill was seen as a vital part of the local economy and way of life. For more than 10 years, he committed himself to the challenging routine of processing wood and transporting logs. Although the work was repetitive and tiring, it provided him with stability. Each day might have seemed the same, but Randy found meaning in the rhythm of his work and his role in the community. The lumber mill represented stability in Randy's life, while music served as his escape, a way for him to express emotions he often found difficult to put into words. Since childhood, music had been important to him. Over time, playing guitar and singing shifted from being just a hobby to a crucial outlet for his feelings. Randy often performed at a local bar in Langley, where residents gathered to relax after their long workdays and enjoy live music. On stage, he transformed from his usually quiet self into an engaging and energetic performer, captivating his audience. The townspeople appreciated his heartfelt performances, which were filled with authenticity and passion. At a local bar one ordinary evening, Randy met Laurel, a woman who would profoundly impact his life. Laurel, 6 years older than Randy, worked as a bartender and often watched his performances from behind the bar. She was confident, charismatic, well loved by the patrons for her ability to create a welcoming atmosphere and her friendly demeanor. What began as casual chats about music and life quickly developed into a deeper bond. Their mutual love for music and shared aspirations brought them closer. Laurel played the piano and, although her life had taken a different path, she had always dreamed of pursuing a professional music career. This common dream, paired with genuine interest in each other, soon evolved into something much more significant. Life at the lumber mill went on as usual for Randy, but everything changed with Laurel's presence. Their relationship grew stronger as they started planning their future together. Although Langley felt familiar and comfortable, it began to seem too small for the aspirations they had. They dreamed of a life where music could be more than just a pastime. They wanted it to be the core of their future. Randy's days at the mill, his nights performing at the bar, and his evenings with Laurel filled him with a sense of purpose, love. He hoped for what lay ahead. Randy and Laurel frequently looked back on their wedding day in 1990. It was a modest ceremony with just their closest friends and family, creating a warm and intimate setting. The event featured live music, including a special song that Randy sang for Laurel, marking the start of their loving journey together. A few years later, their daughter Emily was born. She quickly became the center of their family. Randy often expressed how Emily was the best thing that ever happened to him. Anyone who knew them could see the deep love he had for her. Emily was only 8 years old when her life changed drastically. She started suffering from severe headaches that were so painful she could no longer participate in her music activities. From a young age, Emily had a natural talent for singing, which amazed her parents and earned her awards in competitions. She was living a lively life, taking vocal lessons and dreaming of becoming a singer. Her parents, encouraged by her success, did everything possible to support her dreams. Initially, Randy and Laurel struggled to understand their daughter's condition. They visited multiple doctors and underwent numerous medical tests, but none provided clear answers, leaving them confused. Emily had to leave school and start home-based learning because the bright lights and loud noises in classrooms worsened her severe headaches. Her room turned into a dim sanctuary where she spent most of her time. Randy and Laurel took turns caring for her, trying their best to alleviate her pain and offer comfort during her difficult times. After thorough medical evaluations, the doctors diagnosed Emily with migraines. This news deeply affected her entire family. The medications they prescribed provided only slight relief, easing her pain a little but never completely stopping the headaches. The music she previously cherished, which brought her so much happiness, was now unattainable. Once a vibrant and energetic young woman, Emily began to withdraw, spending most of her time in silence, darkness. Randy and Laurel were determined to find a solution for their daughter's condition. They explored numerous treatments, consulted many specialists, and looked into alternative therapies, but nothing provided the lasting relief they had been hoping for. The medical outlook was bleak. Migraines are often chronic, and many people suffer from them for life. Statistics revealed that around 53% of migraine sufferers cannot drive because of their symptoms, 30% find it difficult to finish their education, and 34% encounter issues in maintaining employment. Although these figures indicated that Emily's situation was relatively common, they offered little comfort to her parents, as they witnessed her once vibrant spirit fade. Randy went through a really tough time during these years. Music, which had once been his escape, now reminded him painfully that Emily could no longer share in the joy it brought her. Playing guitar in the evenings felt empty without her voice alongside him, and performing at the local bar, which used to be a source of joy for him, no longer felt fulfilling. He began to spend more time at home to support Emily as much as he could. However, as her condition worsened, both Randy and Laurel felt increasingly powerless. Their vibrant daughter, who was once full of life and determination, now isolated herself in her room, avoiding the world and its noise. Randy continued to work, but his thoughts were constantly with Emily. Each morning, he hoped to find a way to relieve her suffering. By the time Emily turned 18, her condition had worsened significantly. Her migraine episodes became more frequent and intense, sometimes lasting for several days. This constant pain made it difficult for her to study and maintain friendships. Despite these obstacles, Emily remained determined. She enrolled in the Fine Arts program at the University of British Columbia, aspiring to become an opera singer. For Emily, going to university was not just about academics, it was an opportunity to regain a sense of normalcy and pursue the life she had always dreamed of. Despite feeling physically exhausted and experiencing frequent pain, Emily committed herself to staying active. She took vocal lessons, learned music theory, studied art history and literature. She also participated in student events and concerts whenever possible. Her classmates admired her determination to engage in university life despite the challenges she faced. However, beneath this outward involvement, Emily was battling significant struggles. She frequently had to miss classes and catch up on her studies alone. The strong medications prescribed for her migraines left her feeling tired, drowsy, and weak. Her treatment plan included triptans, anticonvulsants, and antidepressants to help manage her symptoms. But these medications also had serious side effects, such as depression, difficulty concentrating, and a decline in her overall health. Over time, Emily chose to limit her medication intake as much as possible to lessen its effects on her body and began exploring alternative ways to manage her condition. Emily focused on meditation and breathing exercises, used cold compresses on her head, and stayed away from bright lights, strong smells, and loud noises. Her room became a safe space where she could escape anything that increased her pain. During her worst migraine episodes, she would sometimes stay in complete darkness for entire days, while her parents took turns caring for her and doing their best to alleviate her discomfort. Despite these challenges, Emily worked hard to maintain a sense of normal life. She kept in touch with her friends, even though she couldn't see them as frequently as before. Sometimes, she had to cancel plans at the last moment due to sudden migraine attacks. However, her friends remained supportive, visiting her at home and spending time with her to ensure she didn't feel alone. Despite her challenges, Emily remained committed to the things she loved. Her desire to return to music and live a fulfilling life never faltered, even as the journey became increasingly difficult. On May 7, 2015, Randy shocked everyone in his life with a Facebook post. He revealed some unimaginable actions he had taken in the prior 10 days. He started the post by expressing his love for his daughter, Emily, whom he described as an exceptional daughter, talented, intelligent, and kind. Emily brought immense joy to their family, filling their home with laughter and always willing to assist others, even while facing her own struggles. Unfortunately, her illness had robbed her of so much, forcing her to give up dreams she had worked tirelessly to achieve. Emily had been experiencing migraines since elementary school. The persistent pain caused her to fall into deep depression, making it common for her to endure days without relief. Randy observed how his daughter watched her classmates enjoy normal lives while she spent her time in hospitals or isolated in her dark, quiet room. Despite her efforts to hope for a brighter future, nothing seemed to alleviate her suffering. Randy worked at a lumber mill, but when he wasn't working, he dedicated all his time to Emily. He often told his friends that she was his whole world and that he couldn't bear the thought of life without her. Watching her in pain and feeling powerless to help was pushing him toward despair. Friends noted how Randy shared his struggles with them, making it evident how deeply he was affected emotionally. In this Facebook post, he confessed to taking a gun and ending Emily's life, explaining that he did it to free her from her constant pain. He described his vision of her as an angel soaring above the clouds, her long hair flowing in the wind, finally at peace. But he didn't stop there. Randy also revealed that he had taken the life of his wife, Laurel, because he couldn't bear the thought of her enduring the heartbreak of losing their daughter. A few days later, he also ended the life of his sister, Shelley, claiming he wanted to spare her from the shame of his actions. In the post, Randy shared Emily's journey in her battle against illness, highlighting her incredible strength and resilience. Unfortunately, despite her efforts, the illness had taken its toll. Randy expressed his helplessness as he watched her suffer daily, knowing he couldn't change her situation. He often told friends that he would do anything to support Emily, and ultimately, he felt this was the only way to help her. At the end of his Facebook post, Randy mentioned that his family was now in a better place, free from suffering. He expressed sorrow for his actions, took full responsibility, and apologized to anyone he had hurt. The post closed with the haunting phrase, "Rest in peace, my little family." After Randy's post went live, his friends and acquaintances immediately alerted the police out of concern for Randy's family. They were shocked by the content and wanted to ensure everyone's safety. Law enforcement acted quickly after receiving several calls. Officers were sent to Randy's home to look into the matter. One of Randy's closest friends, Brian Jones, was filled with fear and confusion as he read the Facebook post. Initially, he hoped it was just a mistake or a cruel joke. However, when he saw the signature, Daddy-O, Hugs and Kisses, a nickname Randy had used since school, Brian understood that Randy had truly written those words. This left Brian in shock and disbelief. He had always seen Randy as a kind and caring person, deeply devoted to his family. The thought that his friend could commit such an act or even possess a firearm was unfathomable to him. Brian remembered how lovingly Randy spoke of his family, making it difficult for him to grasp how things had taken such a tragic turn. The seriousness of the situation struck him immediately, and he knew he needed to respond quickly. He left work early and made his way to Shelley's house, trying to call Randy as he went. Each unanswered call only increased his worry. When Brian got to Shelley's house, he saw a pile of undelivered newspapers on the porch. This was unusual because Shelley was always dependable and took her responsibilities seriously. Her old van was in the driveway, the curtains were tightly shut. The yard was eerily silent, with no signs of life. Brian knocked on the door multiple times, but no one answered. The atmosphere felt unsettling and unnaturally quiet. Shelley had become a private person after her parents died. She lived by herself, had no children, and hardly spoke to her neighbors. Her primary job was delivering newspapers, and she was recognized for her reliability, punctuality. When Brian noticed the newspapers piled up without being picked up, he became worried and called the police. The dispatcher told him that he wasn't the only one worried about the family. A patrol unit was already on its way to investigate. When the police arrived, they tried to reach Randy Jansen, who was inside his house. They saw him through a second-floor window with a gun. The officers used loudspeakers and attempted to call him, but Randy did not reply. Understanding the seriousness of the situation, the officers proceeded cautiously to prevent further escalation. The house was surrounded, and negotiators began their work, but Randy did not show any intention to surrender or communicate. After several hours, the situation became much more critical. Randy set the house on fire, and officers saw smoke rising from the upper floor. They tried to get inside, but the flames spread too quickly, blocking access through the windows. Officers noticed a body wrapped in a sheet on the first floor, but they couldn't reach it to confirm its identity. Within minutes, the fire took over the entire house. When firefighters arrived, the house was fully engulfed in flames, and they could not save it. Investigators discovered 3 bodies in the charred remains of the house on Llanberis Road in Rosedale. 19-year-old Emily was found in her bedroom, wrapped in a sheet. 50-year-old Laurel was located in the kitchen, covered with a blanket. Both women had suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Randy's body was located in a second-floor bedroom. He had died by suicide using a firearm and setting the house ablaze. The positioning of his body and the presence of the weapon indicated that Randy was experiencing severe emotional distress when he made the choice to end his life. When police arrived at the home of Randy's sister in Langley, British Columbia, they found her body in the living room. She had been shot twice in the head and was covered with a blanket. No signs of a struggle, indicating that Randy had likely caught her by surprise. Over the past year, Emily's health had worsened significantly. Doctors had to give her morphine injections to manage her severe pain, and these were used as a last resort. Neighbors often witnessed her parents assisting her into their home after her hospital visits. Emily was so weak that she required help to walk, which was heartbreaking for everyone who knew the family. Randy Jansen, Emily's father, dedicated himself to caring for his family despite facing numerous challenges. A year prior to the tragic events, he sought assistance from their family doctor due to ongoing insomnia and intense stress. He shared his struggles with witnessing his daughter's pain. The doctor suggested using sedatives and advised Randy to focus on getting more rest, but Randy refused the medication, feeling it wouldn't truly solve his problems. Brian noted that Randy had never indicated any thoughts of self-harm or intentions to harm others. He described Randy as a calm and hard-working individual always willing to help. Randy consistently put his family first, so no one could have anticipated he was capable of such actions. Brian observed that Randy had reached his breaking point. He could no longer endure watching his daughter suffer, which led him to make a heartbreaking decision. Neighbors who had known Randy since he was a child found it hard to reconcile this event with the kind and gentle person they remembered. They noted that he had never shown any signs of aggression or cruelty. His actions appeared to stem from a sense of desperation and an inability to cope with the immense pain affecting his family. One neighbor recalled Randy saying that if his daughter were to die, he wouldn't have a reason to live. Emily's last tweet, posted just 4 days before the tragedy, stated, "I complain about the pain, but at least I'm here to feel it. I thank God for the chance to live." In Emily's Twitter account, she wrote, "For the first time in 2 years, I've gone 12 hours without pain. I'm so tired of hurting, but I need to keep going." Her resilience was clear, despite the immense challenges she faced. This message expressed her determination to cherish life despite the significant suffering she faced. Her social media posts often reflected her struggle to stay positive in the midst of her illness, highlighting her hope even when times were tough. Emily was remembered as a kind and caring young woman who made an effort to stay connected with her community. She loved music and sang at the local church whenever her health allowed. Many residents of Langley have fond memories of her performances, but as her health declined, she was able to attend church less often. Despite her challenges, she remained generous and thoughtful, baking with her mother, sharing treats with neighbors. On her good days, she also helped local children with their homework. Laurel, Emily's mother, did everything possible to support her daughter. In a Twitter post, she expressed her feelings, saying, "Emily is back in the hospital, praying to God they can help her. I feel so helpless." These words showed the deep pain and despair she experienced while watching her daughter suffer. Although Laurel was emotionally drained, she was determined not to give up and continuously sought ways to improve Emily's condition. Similarly, Shelley, Randy's sister, could not predict the tragedy that would occur. The family never imagined their lives would be changed in such a devastating manner. Over the past year, Randy often shared with friends the heavy burden and stress he felt due to Emily's illness. No one could have predicted that he would eventually become so emotionally fragile that he would consider harming his family. Randy struggled to manage the emotional strain. Despite their shared despair, the family attempted to support one another, but their situation continued to worsen, leading to an unforeseen and tragic outcome. With the details now revealed, it is obvious that feelings of despair, hidden challenges, and deep hopelessness led to an unexpected tragedy. The story of the Jansen family serves as a sobering reminder that even within seemingly stable homes, deep pain can linger just beneath the surface, occasionally breaking out in unpredictable ways. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of John Sweeney. John Sweeney was born on October 13, 1956. He grew up with an older brother and an older sister. People familiar with John's family described his father as a cruel and controlling man. From an early age, John was subjected to his father's strictness and was often the target of physical punishment. Psychologists later identified these harsh experiences as a major factor contributing to John's challenges as an adult. Despite their difficult living environment, John's family was close-knit and working class. His father instilled values of assertiveness and resilience in his sons. However, his methods were harsh, and he may have passed on his authoritarian attitude toward women to John, teaching him that women should always be submissive. Despite these hardships, John developed a strong passion for painting from an early age. At 15, he dreamed of attending art school, but his family did not support his aspirations. Instead, he studied carpentry and specialized in woodworking. This career path left John with a lingering sense of frustration, as he was unable to pursue his true ambitions and was forced to follow a different path in life. John had problems with the police from an early age. As a teenager, he displayed extremely violent tendencies, which led to a number of disturbing incidents. He frequently exhibited aggressive and violent behavior, often targeting his friends. One reported incident involved John getting into a dangerous fight while in high school at a nearby store where he was buying chips. Despite still being a minor, he picked up an axe and swung it aggressively. Witnesses said that, fortunately, no one was injured in the incident. The reckless teenager faced no serious consequences and was only given a warning by the police. By 1974, John had decided to marry. His wife, Anne Bramley, was his neighbor. Together, John and Anne had 2 children, a son and a daughter. Despite Anne's hopes that marriage and family life would calm him down, John remained ruthless, and nothing seemed to change his erratic nature. John's violent outbursts were especially severe when he was drunk, and revealed that he often harmed her pets to intimidate her and escalated conflicts by throwing bricks through windows, causing significant property damage. He repeatedly accused her of infidelity, even though she was faithful and gave him no reason to suspect her. Ironically, John himself had no qualms about pursuing romantic relationships with other women. According to family acquaintances, John treated his girlfriends as if they were his property. His first wife, Anne, experienced this firsthand. She described John Sweeney as sweet and charming until his mood changed. When this happened, he would focus on small issues, becoming aggressive and cruel. In these moments, he would easily explode and seem to invent reasons to justify his anger when none existed. After enduring this behavior for 5 years, Anne decided to file for divorce in 1979. However, like many manipulators, John tried everything to convince her to reconcile. Surprisingly, his efforts worked, and the couple remarried in 1981. During this time, John was able to control his behavior, leading Anne to believe that he had truly changed. Unfortunately, this did not last. Soon after they remarried, John's aggressive and uncontrollable behavior returned, and domestic violence once again became a regular occurrence. Before their relationship ended, they experienced another violent incident. One evening, John got drunk and attacked Anne. This event led her to make a firm decision to leave him and not attempt to mend the relationship. However, true to the behavior of a manipulator, John did not let go easily. Viewing his wife as his possession, John began stalking her. After Anne moved into a new house, an incident occurred while she was visiting a neighbor in the apartment next door. Through the wall, Anne heard suspicious noises coming from her apartment. She suspected it could either be John with malicious intentions or a burglar breaking in. Both possibilities seemed dangerous. Not wanting to take any chances, Anne called the police. When they arrived, the officers escorted her back to her apartment and searched the premises for any threats. Suddenly, John emerged from the closet, holding clothes in one hand and an axe and a knife in the other. He appeared startled to see the police and claimed he had planned to surprise his ex-wife. However, Anne believed he had brought the weapons with the intent to harm her, possibly even to kill her, as she had finally escaped his control. Unsurprisingly, the police did not believe John's story about the surprise and arrested him. However, he was later released without charges because he had not harmed anyone and was technically in his own apartment. The police only secured a verbal promise from him to stay away from Anne. After the divorce was finalized, Anne left with her children, moved away, and went into hiding to escape her dangerous ex-husband. Eventually, John gave up pursuing her. He decided it was time to change his life, leaving the city and embarking on a tour around Europe in hopes of forgetting his troubled past. He began searching for work abroad, believing he could find better opportunities and earn more money. Finding temporary jobs abroad was not difficult for John, but he never stayed in one place for long. He traveled to Germany and France before eventually settling in the Netherlands. Further investigations did not uncover any evidence of assaults on women during these trips. While abroad, John returned to his old habits, searching for a woman he could marry. However, his efforts were unsuccessful, and he was eventually forced to return to his homeland. Interestingly, upon his return, John rediscovered his passion for painting. Experts later analyzed his artwork and attributed its themes to his criminal nature. His paintings were gruesome, often violent and bloody, depicting brutal scenes. However, at the time, they were dismissed as mere works of art. Later, John made a living as a carpenter, taking on repair and construction jobs. He eventually settled in London, where he met Melissa Halstead, a model and photographer. She had hired him to do repairs on a film set. Melissa was an incredibly beautiful woman, and John seemed to take an immediate interest in her. Originally from Ohio, USA, Melissa had moved to another country in Europe, where she felt lonely and had few social connections. She was unaware of John's violent past. John quickly regained his charm, and after visiting her on set a few times, he suggested they meet. This marked the beginning of their romantic relationship. At first, Melissa described their relationship as warm and loving, reflecting John's manipulative behavior. Over time, they began living together. Less than a year later, John attacked her for the first time. Before this, he had repeatedly broken her self-esteem and cheated on her, leaving her feeling completely hopeless. Her career began to suffer, and her family back in Ohio recognized the toxicity of the relationship. Both her mother and sister urged Melissa to leave John as soon as possible. About a year after they met, Melissa's sister visited her in England. While staying at Melissa and John's apartment, she discovered banned substance and some disturbing artwork that John had created. She was shocked by what she saw. Before leaving, Melissa's sister begged her to end the relationship immediately. Despite this, Melissa chose to stay with John. In 1987, John committed his first violent attack on Melissa, which led to legal trouble. He was cautioned twice for his violent behavior. On one occasion, John threw a chair at Melissa, injuring both her legs. On another occasion, he punched her in the face. However, both times he only received verbal warnings and small fines. At the time, British authorities had a lenient attitude towards domestic violence. In the summer of 1988, John decided to move to Austria, and Melissa went with him. Initially, the move seemed to benefit their relationship. They reconnected and experienced a period without violence. During this time, things went well. They both made good money, and Melissa's modeling career began to take off again. She traveled frequently for work, and they could now afford to rent an apartment in central Vienna. However, their relationship soon fell apart. One evening, John's violent nature resurfaced, and he attacked Melissa with a hammer. She was taken to the hospital with a fractured skull. It seems that John harbored resentment towards her and became increasingly obsessed with his art. Psychologists later analyzed his artwork and concluded that it reflected his inner turmoil and violent worldview. Unfortunately, at the time these drawings appeared, no one paid much attention to John or recognized the warning signs. The haunting images clearly showed his desire to kill. While John was in prison, Melissa was recovering from the attack. Despite everything, she no longer resented John and even began to miss him. In February 1989, she appealed to the Austrian legal system, asking the court to pardon John. Under Austrian law, she had the right to do so. Her appeal was successful. Melissa withdrew her statement about the attack, and John was released after serving only 6 months. However, the police ordered John to leave Austria. Despite this, Melissa chose to follow him. They settled in Amsterdam together. In Amsterdam, John and Melissa rented an apartment in the city center, worked, and used a rental car. Their home was located near the train station. In November 1989, Melissa called her family. Since no one was home, she left a voicemail wishing her loved ones well, expressing her love, and saying that she hoped to see them again soon. After the call, she went on a business trip. In the following months, her family tried to contact her, but they were unable to reach her. At that time, cell phones were not available, making communication even more difficult. John also ignored all calls from Melissa's family. After a while, Melissa, exhausted by the constant conflicts and abuse from John, decided to end their relationship. She confided in her colleagues at work, telling them that if anything happened to her, it would be because of John. Soon after, she disappeared and was never seen alive again. On May 3, 1990, a passerby in Rotterdam noticed a suspicious bag floating in a canal. Upon inspection, the bag was found to contain body parts, although the head and hands were missing. The witness immediately alerted the police. The brutal nature of the crime became evident when the body was examined. What shocked the police most was that the victim's spine had been broken in half, and evidence suggested she had been subjected to prolonged torture designed to inflict extreme pain. After the murder, the perpetrator placed the body in a large black bag, which was then dumped in a canal. At the same time, Melissa's family grew increasingly worried, as they had not heard from her for months. A missing person report had been filed in Amsterdam, but since the Rotterdam police did not have access to it, they were unable to identify the victim. With no leads, the investigation was eventually closed. The unidentified remains were buried in a public cemetery in Rotterdam in an unmarked grave, and the police remained unaware of the victim's identity. John, the killer, escaped justice. By 1991, John had returned to London alone. He never told anyone about what had happened to Melissa. Her family suspected that John was involved in her disappearance, but there was no evidence to prove it. As a result, John continued his life without facing any consequences. At a local pub, John met Delia Balmer, a 40-year-old nurse. Their meeting was initially accidental, but John quickly used his charm to make her fall in love with him. Delia, feeling lonely, invited him to move into her house. John seized the opportunity, helping her with the housework and earning her trust. During this time, he worked as a carpenter, earning a good income by creating furniture and home furnishings. However, over time, John's true nature began to reveal itself. After nearly 2 years together, in December 1993, Delia realized the extent of John's temper and cruelty. She finally asked him to leave. Surprisingly, he did not argue and agreed to move out. However, he did not truly leave her life. John continued to frequent the same shops and bars as Delia, making sure they crossed paths often. Wherever she went, John seemed to appear, controlling and pursuing her relentlessly. He even attempted to re-enter her apartment. In May 1994, Delia went on a short trip around Europe with a friend. When she returned, John was furious that he had temporarily lost control of her. He tracked her down, tied her to the bed, and threatened her with a weapon, intensifying her fear. To further intimidate her, John told her a disturbing story about his previous girlfriend, Melissa. He confessed to killing Melissa, sitting with her body in his apartment for 3 days, and then disposing of her remains by dumping them in a canal in another city. Delia realized she was now trapped with a crazed killer. John demanded her complete obedience, warning her that if she did not comply, she would suffer the same fate as Melissa. Delia endured a week of abuse. During this time, she was repeatedly beaten, assaulted, and threatened with a weapon before finally being released in the summer of 1994. In July, Delia sought refuge at a shelter and reported the abuse to the police. She even showed them John Sweeney's disturbing drawings. However, the police dismissed her concerns, calling them a joke and accusing her of exaggeration. In early November, John left the apartment, and Delia took the opportunity to change the locks. When he returned on November 11th and discovered what she had done, he became furious. Despite locking the door, he managed to break in and attack Delia. The next day, Delia fled to the police station again. The officers escorted her back home, but John had disappeared. However, another attack occurred the following day. This time, Delia's neighbors and friends called the police. The officers arrived just in time, as John was inside the apartment with Delia. She ran out to meet the police, crying and terrified. During a search of the apartment, the police discovered a bag in the bathroom that John had brought with him. Inside the bag were rubber gloves, a mask, some rope, and surgical instruments, items that could be used by a murderer. Despite this alarming discovery, the police dismissed its significance. John was arrested and held for a week before being released on the condition that he return to his parents' home, 300 kilometers away from Delia. This distance was considered safe. But on December 22nd, John violated the terms of his bail by going to Delia's house in the evening. That night, Delia, feeling nervous, used a brick to block the basement door before going downstairs to put her bike away. She kept glancing around cautiously, afraid that John might be nearby. When she turned around, she saw John's familiar face staring at her. Suddenly, he pulled out an axe and swung it at her. She tried to defend herself with a knife, trying to cut his palm. Enraged, John grabbed the knife and attacked her. Delia screamed in pain and desperately used her bike as a shield against his repeated attacks. The commotion attracted the attention of neighbors. A man rushed to help, wielding a baseball bat and confronting John to protect Delia. John struck the neighbors several times before fleeing the scene. Delia was then taken to the hospital in critical condition, where she underwent several emergency operations that ultimately saved her life. The police began pursuing John Sweeney, who had fled. Despite their efforts, he evaded capture and escaped the UK. He remained in hiding for the next 6 years until he returned to the UK in 2000. To avoid detection, he used a false identity. John was highly skilled at altering his appearance, which made it easy for him to avoid detection. He quickly found work on construction sites and often used different fake names to remain unnoticed. After returning to his hometown, he met Paula Fields. Like John's other victims, Paula was lonely and vulnerable. Since they both came from the same area, John was able to establish a relationship with her quickly. Paula had spent most of her life on the streets. It was surprising that John managed to deceive her, as people like Paula, hardened by street life, were often very adept at reading others and recognizing manipulators or abusers. However, John Sweeney was such a skilled manipulator that he succeeded in fooling even someone like her. At first, their relationship seemed calm and romantic, but over time, John began to show signs of dissatisfaction. His frustration escalated into aggression and hostility. In December, John Sweeney committed a brutal crime. He killed Paula, and after handling the body, he placed the parts in separate bags. He disposed of the bags in the London Canal. On February 19, 2001, boys fishing in the canal discovered one of the bags containing Paula's body parts. They immediately contacted the police, who later recovered 5 more bags containing other parts of her remains. Advances in DNA technology helped identify the victim as Paula Fields and revealed a suspicious boyfriend. At the time, John was using an alias. However, further investigation by the police uncovered that her boyfriend's real name was John Sweeney. He was also linked to the murder of Melissa Halstead and was wanted for an attack on Delia Balmer. John became one of Britain's most wanted men. The police eventually tracked John down at a construction site in central London, where he was working. A specialist armed team was deployed to arrest him, as he was known to carry weapons. When apprehended, John did not resist, likely overwhelmed by the presence of heavily armed officers. A subsequent search of his flat uncovered over 300 gruesome works of art and poetry. Some of these artworks contained references to Paula and other victims. John Sweeney was later convicted of the attempted murder of Delia Balmer. On March 5, 2002, he was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after only 9 years. With good behavior, he could have been released even earlier. Delia was deeply unhappy with this outcome. As the police continued to investigate Paula Fields' death, they faced numerous challenges. It took another 6 years. In 2008, they were finally able to match DNA from an unidentified victim found in a Rotterdam canal to Melissa Halstead. This discovery linked John Sweeney to another murder. Delia's testimony, which included his confession, along with the presence of his DNA on Melissa's remains, played a key role in connecting him to this brutal crime. Melissa's murder had taken place more than 20 years earlier. Her family finally learned the truth and sought justice. Despite the evidentiary challenges, the police decided to use John's artwork as admissible evidence. Several of his drawings referenced Melissa's death long before her body was identified. One drawing even depicted a headstone bearing her name, details that only the killer could have known. Nearly 21 years after Melissa's death and 6 years after Paula's murder, the trial for these cases was held on April 4, 2011. John Sweeney was convicted of murder and sentenced to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. This ensures that John will spend the rest of his life in prison. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Pauline Zeil. On February 22, 1995, Pauline Zeil heard the verdict of the court for the crime she had committed. She was lucky to avoid the death penalty. Instead, she was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Tears streamed down her face as she held the hand of her lawyer, seeking comfort despite her unfortunate outcome. She had avoided being placed in a cell with 5 other inmates on death row. Pauline Zeile was a devoted mother, working 2 jobs to support her children. From her first marriage, she had a daughter named Christina. With her second husband, John Zeile, she had 2 sons. Christina lived with her father's relatives in Maryland for a time and did not live with her mother. Many who knew Pauline considered her a good mother. Although she was abandoned by her mother and grew up in an orphanage, no one suspected that she could become a danger to society, especially to her own family. Christina lived with her grandmother, and they had a good relationship. However, just before a series of unfortunate events, her grandmother gave Christina to her mother in Florida. Because they had been separated for so long, Christina was not happy about this reunion. In June 1994, she lived in her mother's small 2-room apartment in Riviera Beach with her 2 younger brothers and John Zeile, her stepfather. John was indifferent to Christina, creating a tense family atmosphere. For months later, Christina's mother, Pauline, reported to the police that her daughter had been kidnapped. While in a crowded store, 7-year-old Christina went into the women's restroom and did not return. Pauline searched everywhere but could not find her. The police took her report seriously and began searching for Christina. During a television appearance, Pauline became emotional, begging for her daughter's safe return, but no one suspected that her feelings might not be sincere. As the police investigated, Pauline's family, friends, and acquaintances revealed that the couple often argued. The tension in the family was not only due to Christina's presence but also to Pauline's marriage to her second husband, John. They argued daily, and he was very controlling. He did not hesitate to resort to violence if things went wrong. Neighbors often heard their arguments, and he was also known to have abused Christina. The police speculated that Christina may have run away, feeling resentment toward her mother and stepfather, and sought comfort from her grandmother, where she had a happier childhood. They began to follow up on this line of investigation. The grandmother stated that she had not seen Christina since she returned her to her mother, although she missed her very much. Interviews with witnesses at a nearby store yielded no useful information. No one had seen a girl matching Christina's description that day, and there were no security cameras in the area. Despite a thorough search of the store, they found no trace of Christina. Then the police discovered a crucial clue: Pauline had sold her bicycle and a videotape. When asked about these items at Christina's school, her mother dismissed them, saying they were no longer needed. At the time, everyone was still hopeful that Christina was alive, but this new information was very disturbing. The police began to question whether Christina had actually been in the store that day and considered the possibility that Pauline's story was a lie intended to mislead the investigation. 2 weeks after Christina's disappearance, the police obtained a search warrant and thoroughly searched the home where Christina lived with her mother. Unfortunately, these searches did not yield any useful information. They could not find any clues at the time. Pauline, the girl's mother and the last person to see her alive, became the prime suspect. However, the situation changed dramatically a few days later when Pauline went to the police in tears and confessed. She claimed that her husband, John, had beaten their daughter to death, but insisted it was an accident. Pauline provided a detailed account of Christina's final moments. A victim of domestic violence, she admitted to fabricating the kidnapping story to mislead the police. Her efforts to cover up the crime ultimately contributed to her long prison sentence. John Zeile lived with his wife, Pauline, and their sons in a cramped apartment. They struggled financially, and the difficult living conditions may have contributed to negative feelings towards their daughter, Christina. On September 16, 1994, John lost control and beat Christina because she was dirty and had problems with urinary incontinence. Neighbors heard noises, including John's screams and Christina's cries, which sounded different from the typical cries of a child. They could hear muffled thumping, followed by Christina screaming louder. Eventually, the noise died down, but the mother begged John to stop. During the incident, Christina lost consciousness and began to convulse. John hit her hard enough to silence her and covered her mouth with his hand, causing her to choke. When things finally quieted down, neighbors could hear John's panicked voice. John and Pauline hid Christina's body in a closet for a week before moving it to a vacant lot behind a shopping center to bury it. Pauline agreed to reveal Christina's burial location. On October 27, Christina's body was found. She had multiple stab wounds. Forensic experts confirmed that the cause of death was strangulation. The child had suffocated while trying to cover her face with her hands. Police discovered that while the body was in the closet, the couple had prepared for the burial by purchasing items such as shovels, tarps, cleaning supplies, and other necessary tools. Pauline had acted cautiously. She took Christina's belongings, such as her bicycle and videotapes, to a pawn shop. She later admitted that she had done so to erase the memory of her daughter. However, the reality was simpler. She had used the money from the pawn to pay for the burial and clean the house. Pauline blamed her husband for their daughter's death, claiming that he was responsible for killing her. But later revelations changed the story. John claimed that Pauline never intervened when he was beating Christina. On the day he lost control and attacked Christina, he asked Pauline to call for help to save the girl while she was still alive, but Pauline refused to help their daughter. During questioning, Pauline admitted this. She believed that the girl could still be saved, but she was too afraid of facing the consequences of her actions to take her to the hospital. The police discovered that Christina had been abused many times before. Despite this, Pauline never intervened to stop the abuse. Even when Christina begged Pauline for help during John's attack, Pauline showed no interest. Pauline Zeil and John Zeil were later arrested and charged with child abuse and concealing evidence. Pauline, who has 2 sons, faced losing her parental rights. Realizing this during the first hearing, she voluntarily relinquished her rights to her sons through their attorney. A foster family took in the children. Pauline Zeil's trial began, during which she denied her guilt and blamed John for what had happened. Her lawyer argued that Christina's death was accidental, but the prosecution countered effectively, highlighting clear evidence of violence. The defense claimed there were many mitigating circumstances, stating that Pauline was a loving mother and that her colleagues respected her. The lawyers attempted to argue that Pauline was controlled by John, an abusive husband who kept her in a constant state of fear, which prevented her from fighting back. However, the prosecution pointed out that Pauline herself admitted she could have saved her daughter but chose not to. Relatives from Christina's biological father's side, including her grandmother, who had cared for Christina for many years, claimed that from the moment Christina was born, her mother had considered her unwanted and did not want to care for her. They expressed remorse for returning Christina to her mother, Pauline. The prosecution argued that John played a key role in Christina's murder. They claimed that Pauline's actions were completely contrary to her maternal instincts, as she failed to protect her child and did not call for help. Pauline's lawyers disputed this view. However, there was no doubt that both parents were responsible for her death. After an hour and a half of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict. They agreed with the prosecution and found Pauline Zeil guilty of first-degree murder because she was with John when he harmed her and actively participated in covering up the crime, including burying the child in a vacant lot. As a result, she was sentenced to life in prison, plus an additional 13 years for concealing evidence and child abuse, rendering her ineligible for parole. When Pauline's sentence was announced, she cried tears of joy, relieved to avoid the death penalty in the electric chair. Although her lawyers planned to appeal the verdict, claiming it was unjust, their efforts were rejected. The prosecutor stated that the verdict should serve as a warning to abusive parents, emphasizing that such individuals would face serious legal consequences. The case provoked a strong emotional response from the public. As a result, the jury had to be changed to ensure their decision was fair. Many were shocked that Pauline did not intervene to save her daughter, did not call for help, and actively participated in the cover-up of the horrific crime. The public reaction led to a wave of protests. Experts noted that many children are often victims of violence at the hands of their own parents. This situation has been exacerbated by a series of similar crimes in recent years. In California, a woman killed her 3 children, the youngest being 4 years old and the others being 8 and 9. She attempted to blame her husband, who lived far away from the children. The husband fought for custody of the children but had a solid alibi, as he was hundreds of miles away when the tragic events occurred. In 1998, the woman was sentenced to death and is still awaiting execution. There have been many similar cases reported in the media, most notably the 1983 case of Elizabeth Diane Downs. Elizabeth claimed that a stranger shot her 3 children after she picked him up on a deserted road. However, it was revealed that she had shot them herself. Her 7-year-old daughter died as a result, and her 2 other children were left disabled. Elizabeth is currently serving a life sentence for first-degree murder and attempted murder, with the possibility of parole after 25 years, but she has been denied parole several times. A common theme in these cases is that mothers often try to blame their husbands for their actions. Police have become increasingly skeptical of these attempts at blame. This skepticism is evident in Pauline's statements, as police note that her case is not an isolated one. There are many cases of postpartum depression and similar issues affecting mothers. A psychiatrist points out that many tragic child deaths could have been prevented if mothers had received proper support. However, in Pauline's case, there was no indication of any mental health issues, which is why she is facing serious charges. Everyone involved in the case knew the details and believed that Pauline could have prevented her daughter's death. Not only did she fail to stop her husband, but she also missed the opportunity to seek help. When she called for assistance, she could have received guidance that might have saved Christina. However, Pauline deliberately chose not to pursue this option. It was also revealed that Pauline had worked as a nurse. She had a medical degree and was educated and trained in emergency care. Despite this, she made no attempt to help her daughter. John Ziles' trial then began. The prosecutor aimed for the harshest punishment, seeking the death penalty by electric chair. John admitted to beating Christina but denied any responsibility for her death. He claimed it was an accident and that he had no intention of killing her, he had simply misjudged his own strength. His first trial ended in a mistrial due to the jury's inability to reach a unanimous decision. His second trial took place in another city in November 1996, where he was convicted of first-degree murder, concealing evidence, and aggravated child abuse. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, plus 30 years for child abuse and concealing evidence. John listened to the verdict with an impassive expression. The judge ruled that the case was not serious enough to warrant the death penalty, so he overturned that aspect of the sentence. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Cassidy Goodson. Cassidy Goodson's early years were spent in a loving family in a quiet area of the small town of Lakeland, Florida, USA, which has a population of about 100,000 people. Those who knew her described her as a girl with great potential who was outgoing and successful in softball. Both of her parents worked hard for the good of the family. Their first priority was always to provide for their children. Cassidy had a sister and a brother, with whom she had quite close relationships. In her teens, Cassidy had no problems with her parents or the law. She did not use illegal substances, did not smoke, was athletic, and excelled academically. Cassidy helped her mother with housework, and every Sunday, she went with her family to church. Everyone who knew she believed that she had a great future. She was eager to study and planned to pursue a career. However, in the spring of 2012, significant changes occurred in the life of the 14-year-old teenager. Her brother and sister noticed that Cassidy began to behave differently than usual. First of all, she gained weight. However, her mother believed that this could be associated with hormonal changes during adolescence. The girl's clothing preferences changed as well. It seemed that Cassidy was very self-conscious about what was happening, so she began to wear baggy clothes that hid her figure. Cassidy did not even change clothes with her classmates before physical education. Against this backdrop, some people quickly began to suspect that she was pregnant, and rumors about this started to circulate at school. She did not admit it to her sister or best friends. In fact, she found herself in a delicate situation. She was afraid of her family's reaction. She felt great anxiety and decided to hide her pregnancy from her parents, as well as from everyone around her. Gradually, her belly began to grow. Cassidy gained weight but continued to stubbornly wear the same pants to avoid detection. Around the house, she wrapped herself in a blanket. The once smiling and sociable schoolgirl now spent most of her time alone in her room, hardly communicating with anyone. She stopped going to church to avoid catching the eye of acquaintances. Cassidy's sister, as well as her mother, Teresa, noticed strange changes in her behavior. Teresa tried to discuss the possibility of pregnancy with her daughter. Cassidy immediately rejected such assumptions. Her mother insisted that she take a pregnancy test to eliminate any doubts, but deep down, she did not think that Cassidy could keep something like this a secret. Teresa bought several tests, and Cassidy agreed to take them. Teresa trusted her daughter, so she did not attend the test with her. This proved to be very convenient for Cassidy, as she easily managed to deceive everyone, proving that she was not pregnant. Teresa's trust became a fatal mistake. She talked to her daughter about this topic, but Cassidy insisted that she did not need lectures on contraception because she was not intimate active and did not date boys. Teresa believed in her once again, continuing to wash her daughter's clothes every week and monitor her menstrual cycle. Around the same time, even the father began to notice Cassidy's uncharacteristic behavior. One day, when he saw her walking around the house wrapped in a blanket, he also had doubts. He tried to talk to her, as did the rest of the family, but Cassidy rejected any questions or suspicions. Her brother and sister also suspected something was wrong, particularly after the rumors that had spread around the school. They doubted that Cassidy had taken the pregnancy test honestly and even discussed their alarming assumptions with other family members. All of this reached their grandparents, but they too failed to get through to Cassidy, who continued to tell them that she had simply gained weight due to the transition period and now had a lot of complexes because of it. They believed her. By the middle of the summer, her belly had become so large that it was impossible to hide it with baggy clothes. She walked around wrapped in a blanket almost all day, but continued to insist that she was not pregnant. Cassidy ignored her loved ones and could even be rude in her responses. Realizing that it was impossible to get through to their daughter, her parents simply calmed down and continued to lead their usual lives. Of course, it is impossible to hide something like this forever, as the due date was approaching, and it all could turn into a terrible tragedy. On September 19, 2012, Teresa entered the bathroom after Cassidy had spent a long time in the shower. She noticed blood on the toilet and on the floor next to it. Alarmed, Teresa immediately suspected something was wrong and went to her daughter's room. There, she found Cassidy, who seemed exhausted. She was pale and looked sickly, but still refused to explain what was happening. Cassidy tried to act as if everything was fine. However, after discovering the blood, her mother insisted on taking her to the medical center's emergency room, where the doctors examined her daughter for a possible miscarriage. Cassidy eventually confessed to the doctors. After the examination, it was futile to deny it, so she admitted that she had indeed had a miscarriage. According to Cassidy, while she was sitting on the toilet, the fetus unexpectedly fell out, and she didn't have time to process what was happening. Allegedly, Cassidy accidentally washed the fetus away and only realized the gravity of the situation afterward. She was scared and didn't tell her mother about it. Cassidy received the necessary medical assistance, her wounds were treated, and she was sent home to recover. When Cassidy and her mother returned home, both tried not to talk about what had happened. Teresa provided her daughter with comprehensive support. On September 22, 2012, Teresa noticed a suspicious and unpleasant smell in Cassidy's room. Since Cassidy was not there, Teresa decided to do some cleaning, thinking her daughter had merely forgotten to throw out some food. Of course, she was curious about the source of the unpleasant odor and wanted to eliminate it. While sorting through dirty laundry, it quickly became apparent that the same unpleasant smell emanated from it. Digging to the bottom, she found a box containing a plastic bag. When she opened it, she found the lifeless body of a baby. Horrified, Teresa went to the police, reporting what had transpired. That same evening, law enforcement officers arrived at the Goodson house and took them to the station for questioning. Cassidy, without much resistance, admitted that there had been no miscarriage. She had simply given birth and hidden the baby's body from everyone. According to Cassidy's confession, on that fateful day, her water broke, but she managed to conceal it by soaking her bed linens. She then went to the bathroom, where she pretended to take a shower to disguise her actions. She bit down on a towel to endure the pain and stifle her cries while giving birth on the toilet, using scissors to remove the baby from herself. Once it was over, she used another towel to clean the bathroom of blood. Exhausted, she felt the baby breathing. Terrified of being exposed, she decided to get rid of him. Cassidy strangled her child, hid his body in a plastic bag, which she placed in a shoebox and concealed in her room. Remarkably, Cassidy managed to perform all these actions quickly and without being noticed by the rest of her family, who were at home at the time. The detective wanted to classify the crime properly, so they were interested in the details. Initially, Cassidy was uncooperative but eventually agreed to tell them everything, reconstructing the events on camera. She was given a doll resembling Santa Claus and demonstrated her actions, indicating what she had done. After the baby was in her arms, he did not open his eyes, leading her to realize with horror that she had grabbed the newborn by the throat and squeezed it with all her might. She believed the baby would not survive. The murder occurred while the child was still connected to her by the umbilical cord. Afterward, she cut it, washed everything, and wrapped the baby's body in a plastic bag before hiding it in the laundry container. Cassidy had not discarded the box with the body simply because she did not know how to dispose of it correctly. Only an autopsy could confirm or refute her words. The forensic expert determined that the baby had been born healthy and full term, weighing 9.5 pounds. So, the claim that the baby was born prematurely was impossible to uphold. The baby could have survived if not for the barbaric actions of his mother. The autopsy confirmed that the child died due to suffocation. Additionally, he had multiple injuries, including a head injury from blunt force trauma, likely from a fall after birth. However, this injury could not have been fatal. The most alarming injuries were the lacerations on the small body inflicted by the scissors, which had been used as a surgical instrument to extract the child from her. The detectives were puzzled as to why she left the baby's body in her room, as it seemed Cassidy did not even intend to dispose of it. The unbearable smell in the room ultimately exposed her. Psychologists suggested that this could be a form of remorse. Perhaps Cassidy wanted to be caught to receive what she believed was deserved punishment. Interestingly, Cassidy continued to remain silent about the identity of the baby's father. Detectives speculated whether her pregnancy could have resulted from another crime, such as abuse violence against a minor. But Cassidy only stated that she was trying to hide the pregnancy from her family out of fear that it would harm her relationships with her parents, whom she did not want to disappoint. She intended to give birth and get rid of the baby from the beginning, indicating that her actions were premeditated. After these revelations, Cassidy was arrested and taken to a correctional facility for juvenile offenders in the county. After assessing the nature of the crime, she was charged with premeditated murder. In addition, the question arose about bringing charges of child abuse under aggravating circumstances, also of the first degree. The police believed that her horrific act was enough to try the offender as an adult in order to seek a harsher sentence. They knew her as a smart girl who was never prone to violence. Her parents insisted she was simply too immature to properly evaluate her horrific actions. Under the Florida criminal justice system for adults, the maximum penalty for first-degree murder is life in prison without the possibility of parole or the death penalty. However, due to Cassidy's age, she could not be sentenced to death. Additionally, earlier that same year, a ruling was issued by the U.S. Supreme Court declaring mandatory life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for juvenile prisoners unconstitutional. Cassidy's lawyer faced a difficult fight, not only with the system but also with outraged local residents who learned all the details of the crime and demanded the harshest punishment. Cassidy's parents found a good lawyer who managed to negotiate a plea bargain for manslaughter. The hearings were very emotional. The Goodson family supported Cassidy, and everyone cried, realizing that this murder could ruin many lives. Teresa was brought in for questioning before the trial began. Teresa denied knowing about the pregnancy and detailed how she had initially suspected her daughter was pregnant, but had taken her word for it after the pregnancy tests. She believed that her daughter was simply gaining weight, which could easily be explained by hormonal changes during adolescence. She insisted that if she had known about her daughter's delicate situation, she would have never allowed what happened. She would have supported her daughter and helped Cassidy with childbirth. Later, none of Cassidy's relatives were held accountable. In a video shown to the jury, Cassidy has been reproduced how she killed her newborn son. She repeated that as soon as he was born, she hoped that he was not breathing, but after touching him, she realized that this was not the case, he was alive and breathing. Cassidy then squeezed the baby's neck with her hands, simply to make him stop breathing so that she would not have any problems. It took her about a minute to kill the boy. At the sentencing, the judge emphasized that Cassidy had never previously encountered problems with the law and that the probability of her posing a threat to society was considered minimal. In his opinion, Cassidy was simply immature for such a responsible step as motherhood. However, she was old enough to be punished for her cruel act. During the sentencing, the judge expressed hope that she would not be in the dock for another crime. The prosecutor and the lawyer agreed that Cassidy deserved a second chance, and it was decided to send her to a special program at the Hillsborough Academy for Girls. As she left the courtroom, Cassidy wiped away tears with the sleeve of her prison uniform. A few months later, Cassidy had to appear in court again for the commission to decide her future. She was sentenced to 1.5 years in prison, with the stipulation that if she again went down a slippery path of crime, she would not receive another chance for rehabilitation. After her release, she would be under close supervision and must follow the rules. Upon the slightest violation, Cassidy could end up behind bars again, as an adult. Special attention was paid to the investigation of the child's paternity. Detectives were able to establish that it was another minor who did not even know about the pregnancy. The relationship between Cassidy and the boy had ended before the pregnancy. The specific name of the young man was never revealed, so that no one else would be implicated in this high-profile case, which had caused wide public resonance and uproar. Protracted disputes and debates were just beginning, as this case raised the whole country on its feet. All local and national media seemed to want to comment on the incident. In particular, one of the studies detailed numerous incidents similar to the Cassidy Goodson case, identifying a common pattern: girls are most afraid of hiding their pregnancies from their mothers. It is noteworthy that many of these crimes are committed by unmarried girls who fear being judged by their parents. However, not everyone agreed with this theory. Some studies conducted by other experts indicated that fathers tend to be stricter in such matters. In any case, this raised the sensitive issue of the Goodson family's involvement and the contribution they made to the boy's death. Cassidy maintained she was compelled to hide her situation from her relatives, fearing relationship deterioration. Even in the face of overwhelming evidence, she continued to insist on her version of events and openly lied. For many, this issue was particularly acute, especially after the events that unfolded. Experts in psychiatry had split into two camps. Some supported Cassidy and considered her family indirectly involved, while others solely blamed her for the crime. All of this sparked numerous debates, with research results being scrutinized and analyzed. For example, another expert study showed that 7 out of 9 girls who committed such crimes were their father's favorites or had grown up without a mother. Despite their lack of mental health issues in everyday life, they portrayed simplified roles that created a dangerous mix. This mix led to significant adjustments in their behavior and ultimately resulted in the murder of newborns. At the same time, these girls were often successful in their studies, participated in sports, and were popular in school, similar to Cassidy. This mix of roles caused a kind of guilt for being close to someone, which could distort their perception, making their own baby seem alien or harmful, something to be gotten rid of. Often, such teenagers hope of stillbirth, as it appears to be the easiest way to avoid responsibility. After that, they can dispose of the child without guilt and leave. All of this can be exacerbated by isolation from loved ones, as was observed in Cassidy's case. Refusing to discuss her problems with her family, she drove herself into a corner. Cassidy's actions sparked controversy, including debates about the topic of terminating pregnancies. It seemed that this would be an obvious solution to her problem. However, judging from the social media reactions and media coverage of the Cassidy Goodson story was used as an argument in favor of allowing abortions at such a young age. Many wondered why the burden of making such heavy decisions was entirely placed on an underage schoolgirl. Cassidy's parents' attempts to understand what was happening, they remained convinced that they had done absolutely nothing wrong. Questions arose about how one could not notice their daughter's growing belly and strange behavior. Why did they so easily and simplistically ignore the growth of her belly? Relatives noted that her behavior became increasingly uncharacteristic for her. Usually, close relatives notice such changes, but in her case, it seemed as if everyone was indifferent to her fate. They were surprised that it took finding blood in the bathroom for her mother to understand what was happening. Why, before this event, did no one take Cassidy to a medical center? Some people attempted to shift the blame for the crime from Cassidy to her parents, believing that she simply did not receive enough attention from her loved ones. This, too, could have concealed the real reason for her desire to keep the pregnancy secret. People were divided on these issues, with many disturbed by the fact that scissors were used. According to doctors, Cassidy used them to cut herself, severing the umbilical cord of a still, living child. To quickly pull out the baby, she used an ordinary office tool as a surgical instrument. Naturally, Cassidy experienced severe pain, but to cope with it, she clenched a piece of towel in her teeth. It was unclear what led to this mental or emotional state, whether it was her own horror or fear of what her parents might do. She was terrified of enduring any punishment just to prevent her mother and father from discovering what was happening. This raised reasonable concerns about what was really occurring within the walls of her home, leading detectives to conduct a thorough investigation. However, suspicions of cruel treatment from the parents' side could not be confirmed, as no bruises or signs of abuse were found on Cassidy's body. The other children in the family denied any physical abuse from their mother and father. After a year and a half in a correctional facility for girls, Cassidy was released. She successfully completed a rehabilitation program for juvenile offenders, and it was noted that she was not aggressive. The risk of reoffending was considered minimal. Cassidy desperately resisted reintegrating into society, having lost all her friends, received threats, and feared going outside. She often admitted that she felt hated and even persecuted. Cassidy realized she was living in hell, and it was unclear when this would end. She returned to her bedroom, which her parents had left untouched since her arrest. Everything remained in its usual place, even the lotion she had used at the age of 14. The hardest part was looking into the eyes of her loved ones, who wanted to help her. Despite the traumatic events and the heinous act she committed, Cassidy did not abandon her desire to become a mother. In 2017, she married and gave birth to her first daughter, followed by her second daughter, 2 years later. After the birth of her second girl, she posted on her social media that she longed to have a boy. These events were not just happy moments in her life but also demonstrated Cassidy's determination to fight. She expressed online that people around her seemed to wish she wouldn't have children at all. When asked why, Cassidy responded with a smile, indicating that people could not forgive her for killing a baby and that she had many haters. Many wrote that they wanted Cassidy to remain behind bars for the rest of her life, unwilling to live next to a child killer. On her social media, Cassidy posted numerous photos portraying herself as a loving mother, a young woman trying to build her happiness and family. It seemed that with age, as she began to understand the full gravity of her crime, she struggled to forgive herself for the fact that her first child died. In fact, the boy did not even have a name. Cassidy didn't consider what to call him. Therefore, in the case of the murder of a newborn, he was simply referred to as Baby Goodson. All these years, Cassidy remained under close scrutiny from not only the authorities but also the public. Even after so long, people remained indignant about the fate of the boy strangled in the first minutes of life. In her posts, Cassidy often hinted at external pressure. In 2020, she made a post indicating that she was being subjected to constant harassment that she could no longer tolerate. Cassidy created a new account and began sharing her photos again. She studied to be a nurse at Madison College. It appears that the judge may have been mistaken in thinking that she had corrected her ways. Since 2021, she began to face legal troubles again and ended up in prison, just like her husband. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Michelle Lowe. In the San Diego, California area, Michelle Lowe lived with her family, which included her parents, her brother Michael. The house was always full of life and laughter. Michelle's mother worked as a nurse and inspired her daughter to follow in her footsteps. After her mother died, Michelle decided to finish what her mother had started and see it through to the end. She became a source of support for her family, learning to drive, cooking, and always giving advice. Michelle is a nursing student at Samuel Merritt University in Oakland and is interning at Kaiser Permanente Medical Center in Hayward. On May 27, 2011, after a long shift at the hospital, Michelle decided to quickly run to her car in the parking lot to get something. However, on her way to the car, she suddenly stopped, changed direction, and a few minutes later, a white Honda CR-V quickly drove out of the parking lot. When they began gathering all the students towards the end of her shift, Michelle was nowhere to be seen. Her personal belongings were left in the break room, her phone was not answering. This behavior was completely unlike her, and her instructor suspected something was wrong, so they immediately called the police. The next morning, 10 hours after Michelle's disappearance, there was still no news of her. Her brother and other relatives began searching for her, joining forces with the police and volunteers. Michelle's friends and colleagues came to the police station, clearly concerned about her disappearance. They insisted that her behavior had been too strange and that no one was willing to leave before a full investigation began. The officers quickly realized how serious the situation was. Traces of blood were found in the parking lot where her Honda had been parked. At about 9 a.m., they found her Honda CR-V itself. It was locked and neatly parked in a visitor spot near an apartment building just a kilometer from the hospital. Inside the car were her laptop and someone else's student ID from Sal Merritt University, which lay on the back seat. Michelle had no connection to the owner of the ID, and it remained unclear why it was there. Later, it was discovered that the card had been stolen a couple of days before Michelle's disappearance. Most likely, the attacker had stolen the ID to gain access to the building and possibly lured Michelle to the parking lot before disappearing with her in her own car. Detectives immediately understood that this was not the work of a random criminal, but someone who knew her schedule well. The theory that someone had simply attacked her randomly in the parking lot seemed unlikely. Hospital records showed that 30 minutes after Michelle walked into the parking lot, the emergency room received a call. At 7:30 p.m., the emergency department received a call. The caller introduced herself as Michelle and asked to speak to the teacher. The nurse who answered the call informed the caller that she would need to transfer the call to another department, but the caller insisted that the nurse not do so. She mentioned that she just wanted the teacher to know that Michelle had called to inform her that Michelle would not be able to come back that night because she had received a message that her father had had a heart attack. When Michelle's car was being towed away for further examination, her brother Michael unexpectedly received a message from her phone, "I'm fine." Then another message came, "I'm not missing. The phone is glitching and has erased all data." These messages drained the battery. Shortly afterward, friends began receiving strange messages, one after another, claiming that she had a flat tire, that she was back in Reno, that she needed a break from social media, and that she was not feeling well and wanted to rest. Michelle's ex-boyfriend noticed the activity on her phone and immediately wrote to her, but the reply was, "Who is this?" By May 31st, the reward for information on Michelle's whereabouts had increased to $20,000, and after a few days, it reached almost $100,000. The family hired a private detective, and more than 100 volunteers joined the search, dividing into 14 teams to cover an area of several kilometers. The reward continued to grow. During the investigation into Michelle's relationships, one interesting detail emerged. She had problems with an old friend named Giselle Daiwag Esteban. The girls had been close for many years and even went to college together. Giselle was dating a man named Scott, and they had a 6-year-old daughter. However, their relationship had ended on a bad note, which sparked the issues between Michelle and Giselle. Long before Giselle and Scott started dating, Michelle had gone on a couple of dates with Scott but quickly realized that they were better suited as friends. There was never any romance or intimacy between them. Despite this, Giselle became obsessively jealous. Her behavior grew increasingly strange, and her relationship with Michelle began to deteriorate. Michelle continued to be friends with Scott and refused to stop communicating with him just because Giselle wanted her to. She ignored Giselle's strange and obsessive claims. When detectives came to Giselle to ask her a few questions, she did not hide her obvious antipathy towards Michelle and didn't even try to pretend otherwise. Giselle asserting that she had long asked Michelle to stay away from her daughter and to stop communicating with their mutual friends. She described their relationship as torment, calling Michelle a best friend who cheated on her with her ex-fiancé. The detectives then found Scott, who honestly shared his version of events. They noticed that he was sincerely worried and even participated in the search for Michelle, attending meetings and vigils organized in her honor. Scott shared how Giselle behaved towards him and his family. At some point, when their relationship reached another crisis, he tried to improve his relationship with Giselle for the sake of their daughter. However, these attempts always ended in failure. He showed the detectives a long correspondence with Giselle, where she constantly mentioned Michelle and wrote increasingly aggressive messages, such as, "I hope you find that nasty." Giselle accused Michelle of destroying their family and threatened that she would soon become unnecessary. Giselle even sent messages directly to Michelle, insulting her and accusing her of ruining her family. Additionally, she followed Michelle to San Diego. Scott also showed the police a recording of one of Giselle's outbursts of rage. In the recording, she was sitting in a car with their daughter in the back seat. Giselle insisted that Scott be honest about Michelle and threatened to kill them both if he lied about his relationship with Michelle. She gave him what she called a last and final warning. Scott stated that Giselle was temporarily placed in a psychiatric clinic, where she was diagnosed with manic depressive disorder and bipolar disorder. After that, Giselle continued to come to Scott's house, sometimes even going inside and just sitting in a room until she was noticed. Scott was able to achieve complete custody of their daughter, which further angered Giselle, prompting her to move back to Hayward to be closer to them. Just 3 days before Michelle went missing, Scott filed for a temporary restraining order against Giselle, claiming that she had threatened him and his family. On the same day, he accused Giselle of breaking into his home and into their daughter's room. The police continued to review CCTV footage in the hope of obtaining clear images of Michelle's car. Her brother did not believe that his sister could simply get lost, as she always stayed in touch with the family and even reminded them to call their grandmother on Mother's Day. A reward for any information about Michelle's whereabouts continued to grow, and the search remained active. The police still hoped to find Michelle alive, but the evidence they gathered indicated that their chances were diminishing with each passing day. Their worst fears were confirmed when traces of Michelle's blood were found in her car. They called her family and informed them that the case was no longer being treated as a disappearance. Nevertheless, Michelle's family, determined to continue searching for her and hoping for the best, refused to believe the worst until there was definitive proof. Giselle remained the only suspect in the case, and the police invited her for a full interrogation. By that time, she was already pregnant with her second child. During the conversation, she admitted that she was indeed at the hospital the night Michelle went missing, supposedly for a routine medical examination. When asked about their friendship, Giselle referred to Michelle as her sister but noted that their relationship had deteriorated due to a mistake made by Michelle and Scott. Giselle was released, but the police continued to monitor her, even installing a tracker on her car. Investigators believed she was connected to Michelle's disappearance, but they doubted whether she had acted alone due to her petite stature of only 158 centimeters. In the meantime, the police stepped up their investigation. They questioned Giselle's neighbors, who confirmed that Giselle and Michelle had been friends. Giselle told the press that she had nothing to do with Michelle's disappearance. Even her father joined the search for Michelle, flying in from Vietnam and calling on all local residents to help. An interesting turn of events occurred when Scott called the police and reported that he had found Michelle's phone in the back of his mother's car. Everything indicated that Giselle had planted it, since the tracker on her car showed that she had driven up to Scott's house several times. Security at the medical college where Michelle studied analyzed the data from the stolen student card, which had been used to access the building on May 26, the day before Michelle's disappearance. The cameras recorded Giselle. She had figured out the network technology and gained access to the card, stating that she was interested in enrolling. After receiving the card, Giselle began checking door locks, entering various classrooms, and inspecting the teacher's desk, where she found a student schedule, one of which belonged to Michelle. Now knowing the exact time when Michelle was supposed to be at college the next day, Giselle left the building. Analysis of phone data showed that on the day of her disappearance, Michelle and Giselle were in the same place at the same time. The next day, Giselle went into the Apple store and asked to unlock the iPhone, explaining to the technician that her daughter had accidentally locked her phone. After successfully unlocking it, Giselle left and went to Chuck E. Cheese, where cameras caught her texting. At the same time, Michelle's friends started receiving strange and obviously fake messages, which were confirmed by cell phone towers as coming from Michelle's phone. Despite there being no body, the police already had enough evidence to arrest Giselle Esteban for murder. When she was arrested at the front door of her home, a pair of shoes with Michelle's blood on the soles were also found in Giselle's car, along with a lock of Giselle's hair and her DNA on the steering wheel. Giselle had searched the internet for information on how to cause a heart attack without a trace, follow a person without being caught, and how to pick locks. She also searched for information on toxic gases such as potassium chloride and carbon monoxide. After Michelle went missing, her name was entered into the search bar more than 300 times. 10 days after Giselle's arrest, Michelle's remains were found in a shallow grave in a remote area, about 20 kilometers from Giselle's home. 3 months had passed, and the body was badly decomposed, so the exact cause of death could not be determined. The Alameda County coroner confirmed the identity of the remains in September 2011. Giselle Esteban appeared in court. She pleaded not guilty, claiming that the murder was an accident caused by a moment of anger and that Michelle allegedly provoked her. Her lawyer tried to prove that it was not a premeditated murder but one of chance. However, Giselle herself did not testify and appeared absolutely emotionless in court, without expressing a drop of remorse. Prosecutors assumed that Giselle had planned the attack in advance. She had tracked down Michelle, studied her schedule, waited for her to come out to the parking lot, and then attacked her with a sharp object. This explained the traces of blood, how she could load Michelle's body into the car and take it away. The prosecutor called Giselle a sociopath, noting her coldness and calculation. He emphasized that this was a carefully planned attack on a person who did not even suspect the danger. Giselle Esteban was found guilty of first-degree murder. She did not react to the verdict and left the courtroom in silence. At his sentencing hearing on December 10, Esteban was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the right to parole. Michelle's family was disappointed. They had hoped for a life sentence without the possibility of parole. With such a sentence, they would be forced to attend a parole hearing when she files the appropriate petition. Michelle's brother, Michael, was deeply distressed by the loss. He recalled how his sister had planned to follow in their late mother's footsteps and become a nurse to help people. For the family, the loss of Michelle was immense, and to this day, they hope that justice will prevail. Nothing can bring back their beloved sister and daughter. Michelle's dream of becoming a nurse and following in her mother's footsteps was cut short when Giselle killed her in the parking lot of a Bay Area hospital. It was a fit of jealousy when Giselle mistakenly thought that Michelle had started dating her boyfriend. Michelle's family plans to actively participate in the hearings to remind the judges how cruel this case is and to show how tragic their sister's fate is. The judge noted that in order to be released early, Giselle would have to show sincere remorse, which was not observed from her at the time of the trial. Shortly after her arrest, Giselle gave birth to a boy, who was handed over for adoption. There were rumors that Scott might have been the father, but he denied it, and the real father's name was never revealed. Lee's family continued to volunteer, helping other families dealing with missing loved ones and raising awareness of such cases. Michael said he was sure his sister was now in heaven with their mother, helping him come to terms with his loss and be less afraid of the future. Michelle's father has always been proud of her diligence and busy life, but admits that he has never asked her to spend Father's Day with him. Now he regrets and dreams of turning back time, even just for one day, to invite her to enjoy this vacation together. After the trial, Michelle's family did not stop fighting for justice. They decided to direct their pain and anger toward creating an organization in her honor. The Michelle Lowe Foundation has become an important platform for helping families who have lost their loved ones and for those looking for missing relatives. They have organized annual events and fundraisers supporting search services, began advising other families, teaching them how to act correctly in the first hours after the disappearance of loved ones. Every year on Michelle's birthday, her friends, family, and those who were helped by the foundation gather together to remember her bright personality. It became not just a day of mourning but a celebration of her life, a day of support and love. People bring flowers and launch white balloons into the sky, symbolizing hope and memory. Scott, who was drawn into this terrible story, also took part in the work of the foundation. He decided to change his life and devote himself to raising his daughter. He actively participated in activities so that others would not face such a tragedy. As for Giselle, her chances for early release were minimal. Even after a while, her refusal to repent and emotional indifference made her a symbol of the destructive influence of hatred and envy. The story of how jealousy and unfounded suspicions can destroy lives became an important lesson for many, especially for those who suffer from toxic relationships and mistrust. Ultimately, despite all the tragedy, Michelle's light continued to illuminate the path for others. Her story and memory became a source of strength and inspiration, reminding everyone that love and compassion are stronger than hatred and jealousy. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jamie Stice. On April 12, 2011, in the small town of Morgantown, Kentucky, with a population of 2,500, 30-year-old Kathy Coy unexpectedly went into labor while driving. She had to give birth in her car on the side of the road, close to her home. Kathy had little time to call her friend, Shelley Lindsay, to inform her that she was about to give birth and needed help. When Shelley arrived, she was in the back seat of the car, covered in blood and holding her newborn. Sadly, the joy of becoming a mother was short-lived. Kathy noticed that the baby was having trouble breathing, so Shelley quickly called emergency services and drove them to the medical center. Kathy's hopes of motherhood were overshadowed by a grim situation. The doctors were very concerned. The baby's condition was critical. He was taken urgently to the intensive care unit due to breathing difficulties and a low body temperature, known as cold shock, which can be life-threatening. The doctors were not only worried about the newborn but also had concerns for Kathy and her family's emotional state during this crisis. The police arrived to investigate the situation. They went to the home where Kathy's children from a previous marriage lived with their grandmother. Officers spoke with the eldest daughter, 11-year-old Brianna, and her grandmother. The children expressed surprise at their mother's new baby, as they did not believe she was pregnant. They mentioned that she intended to meet with a friend who was also pregnant, but no one knew the friend's name. The situation seemed suspicious. Detectives accessed Kathy's social media account and identified a friend of hers, 21-year-old Jamie Stice, who was pregnant. The police attempted to reach Jamie but were unable to make contact. The detectives subsequently reached out to Jamie's mother, Jeannie. She informed them that her daughter was in the final stages of pregnancy and that she hadn't heard from Jamie since 9:30 that morning. Concerned, she was contemplating reporting her daughter as missing but realized that the police might not act quickly since not enough time had passed. While the investigation was ongoing, detectives spoke with Kathy again to clarify the timeline of the incident from that day. Kathy confirmed that she had given birth. She explained that she had woken up early, saw her husband Shannon off to work around 4:30 a.m., and then left to meet her friend Jamie around 10 a.m. After their meeting, as she was returning home, she began to feel contractions. Kathy stopped at a restaurant to grab a quick bite but felt the need to leave in a hurry. Realizing she wouldn't reach the hospital in time, she called her closest friend for assistance. Shelley, Kathy's friend, recounted that when she received the call for help, she rushed outside and saw Kathy in the back seat of a car. Kathy was not wearing pants, only a bloody shirt, and she held a baby in her arms, who was also covered in blood, as if he had just been born. Shelley noticed the placenta and recognized that her friend needed urgent help, especially since the baby was struggling to breathe. She quickly got into her car and drove to the medical center. Shelley observed that the baby was covered in grass and dirt but assumed he had fallen and gotten dirty in the car. There was no time to learn more, her priority was supporting the newborn. Both women's accounts were largely similar, with one key difference. Kathy claimed that Shelley delivered the baby, while Shelley denied this. The situation was chaotic, with Kathy in labor crying out, and both her and the baby's conditions creating confusion. While doctors worked to assist the baby, Kathy pleaded with them to save his life. There were concerns about whether the situation was staged, leading to the decision to take Kathy in for questioning at the station. At that time, Kathy had already been examined by doctors, and her condition seemed stable. However, when the police began questioning her about her friend Jamie on social media, her story started to change. Initially, she claimed that she had only briefly met Jamie before ending their friendship. Kathy explained that she had driven Jamie to the Social Security office, dropped her off near the building, and then Jamie had left in an unknown direction. At that point, Kathy began to experience contractions, which forced her to leave abruptly. This part of her story raised doubts. To support her new version, Kathy presented a message from Jamie, which allegedly asked her to pick Jamie up from the Social Security office, a request Kathy refused due to complications in their story. However, when detectives expressed their disbelief, Kathy's narrative shifted again. Now, Kathy stated that she had picked up Jamie and taken her home, but Jamie was so exhausted that she collapsed on the sofa. Kathy claimed her contractions only started after this encounter. The significant changes in her story seemed implausible, but she attributed them to the stress of the emergency situation. Detectives aimed to determine the truth about how Kathy and Jamie met. Jamie's mother, Jeannie, stated that they had known each other for only a couple of months after connecting through social media. Jamie is pregnant with a baby. When asked about Kathy's relationship with Jamie, Kathy claimed she had known Jamie for only a few weeks and had been introduced through a mutual friend while seeking help with housing issues. At this point, inconsistencies regarding their acquaintance and its purpose emerged. Kathy couldn't even name this mutual friend, even though Jamie was 20 weeks pregnant, aligning with her due date, which raised further suspicion. Kathy was later informed that something significant might have occurred around 10:30 a.m., right after their meeting. Jamie was missing, and detectives informed the parents that they could not reach out to her. They encouraged Kathy to assist in the search. At this point, they were already skeptical about whether the baby truly belonged to Kathy. Kathy's husband, Shannon, arrived at the station. He was thrilled that his wife had finally given birth, but was confused about why she was being held and questioned. Shannon informed the police that Kathy had experienced miscarriages in the past, which had led her to struggle with depression. Despite the challenges, she remained hopeful about becoming pregnant again and starting a family. He feared that if their efforts failed, their relationship might end. For a woman desperate to become a mother, the thought of losing her husband could push her to desperate actions, even to the point of harming another woman. It was possible that Kathy had pretended to be pregnant to keep her husband with her. Additionally, her friend Shelley, who took her to the hospital during labor, might have played a role in this situation. Kathy frequently visited Shelley and shared stories about her pregnancy, but it was unclear whether Shelley supported Kathy's deception, suspected her, or had unwittingly assisted in a crime. Shelley told the detectives that she had never faced such accusations before. However, during the investigation, it became clear that she was involved in several aspects of the deception. For instance, after Kathy returned from a gynecologist appointment where she learned she was not pregnant, Shelley pretended to be a nurse. Kathy feared that this news could push her husband to leave her, so she asked Shelley to call him, posing as a nurse who confirmed her pregnancy. Shelley claimed she had no idea that Kathy was pretending to be pregnant or plotting anything deceitful. She believed everything was genuine and was genuinely happy for her friend. Kathy managed to convince Shelley, using various excuses, that pregnancy came with complications and that Shelley's support could help save her marriage. Up until the end, Shelley truly believed that Kathy would soon give birth. However, not everyone shares the same perspective as Shelley. When the police spoke to Kathy's other friends and her husband's relatives, it became clear that there had been a lot of discussion about Kathy's situation over the past 6 months. Many people suspected that she had been deceitful. For example, her mother-in-law often tried to reach out to her, hoping to find out the truth. She believes that Kathy is merely trying to deceive everyone, especially Shannon, to bind him to herself. The mother-in-law was very frustrated with Kathy's behavior and discussed it with her son, Shannon. For a short time, he listened to her concerns. A lot of suspicion arose from the continuous delays in the expected due date. The situation dragged on for so long that it started to seem unrealistic, as Kathy herself had no clear idea of when she would give birth. Witnesses noted that over the past few months, her belly has sometimes appeared smaller and then larger. By late 2011, the mother-in-law was convinced that Kathy was lying and was simply afraid of losing Shannon. She managed to persuade her son by highlighting that his wife was clearly deceiving him. He began to demand proof of the pregnancy, which led to even more elaborate deceptions. To maintain the ruse, Kathy stole an ultrasound photo during a visit. This image helped convince her husband, but it was not the only tactic she used. After stealing the ultrasound photo, Shannon is overjoyed about his wife's pregnancy. However, if the truth were revealed, their relationship would be over. His mother insisted that her son had been deceived. In the face of growing doubts, Shannon demanded more proof. His wife was well prepared and even managed to show him a video of their baby's heartbeat, which she had downloaded from the internet. Shannon was repeatedly misled. His mother was disappointed but unaware of the depths of the deception. She simply didn't know Kathy well enough. As the due date approached, Kathy needed more than just a friend acting as a nurse, a video, and a stolen ultrasound photo. After Jamie's disappearance, the photo was used to convince the police and medical staff that Kathy had given birth to the boy. As they contemplated the situation, a troubling image formed in their minds of how Kathy could have acquired the baby and why his mother, Jamie, was missing. Meanwhile, Kathy was already in an interrogation room at the local police station. Despite being stubborn and refusing to admit anything, she continued to provide confused and conflicting testimony, changing her story with each new detail the police revealed. There was no longer any doubt about her dishonesty, but they needed a confession. It was time to employ some tactics. They decided to leave her in the interrogation room alone for a while. This clever move aimed to see how she would respond and what attempts she would make to extricate herself from the situation. The plan worked, but not in the way they had anticipated. Kathy suddenly grabbed her mobile phone and called an unfamiliar number, pretending to talk to Jamie. When the detectives returned, she mentioned it, but she still couldn't provide any information about Jamie. A check on the phone number revealed that she hadn't actually called Jamie at all. The detectives quickly confirmed that there was no doubt that the boy Kathy had brought to the hospital was Jamie's child. DNA testing confirmed this connection. Although the detectives continued to act confidently, Kathy began to waver in her story. Unfortunately, she still refused to acknowledge what had happened to Jamie. The police informed Kathy that witnesses had seen Jamie get into her car alone that morning, and no one saw her come back, contradicting Kathy's claims. They tried to determine where Kathy had taken Jamie. Why was she holding the baby? Doctors noted that the baby's breathing issues and hypothermia were not accidental. He had been born less than an hour before arriving at the medical center, and his airways were still filled with fluid. Kathy seemed overwhelmed and unsure of how to help him, which caused the baby's condition to worsen. Once these facts were revealed, Kathy presented a new version of her story. Kathy revealed that about 9 months before the current incident, she had visited the hospital and learned from the doctor that she had suffered another miscarriage. After leaving the clinic, she encountered a woman named Ashley, who suggested that she could buy a child for $550 that was expected to be born to Jamie, but insisted they would need to wait until the boy was born. Kathy agreed right away and paid, hoping this would help save her marriage. Afterward, she pretended to be pregnant to maintain the deception while waiting for the birth. On the day of the incident, Kathy claimed she took the child from Jamie and left, asserting that she did not harm him. Kathy's account sounded unbelievable. How could Ashley plan such a transaction, and how did she know 9 months in advance that Jamie would have a baby, especially a boy? Furthermore, Kathy could not provide any contact information or even a description of Ashley, making it clear that she was lying. The detectives quickly noticed her inconsistencies. Eventually, she admitted that the story about purchasing a baby was untrue, but she continued to claim that she took the baby from Jamie's home early in the morning, insisting that Jamie simply vanished after handing over the baby. Kathy did not explain how she ended up with a stranger's child in her arms, although it was evident that the child was Jamie's son. Investigators were quickly able to uncover Kathy's identity and found unsettling details about her. Her stepfather, Imran, reported witnessing her shocking behavior on several occasions. He described her as cruel, manipulative, and unpredictable, believing she was capable of committing terrible acts for her own enjoyment and benefit. Imran mentioned that Kathy had once confessed to him her potential to commit murder. Therefore, he was not surprised to see her in police custody, convinced that she could commit any crime and was indifferent to the pain she caused others. It became clear that Kathy was already known to law enforcement. Detectives found a police report accusing her of stalking a pregnant teacher with whom she worked. Their interactions at school were frequent, and Kathy's behavior had become so troubling that it frightened the teacher, who detailed several disturbing incidents. One particularly alarming moment occurred when the teacher was alone in her office and noticed Kathy silently watching her from the aisle. Remarkably, during the time the teacher was pregnant, Kathy also claimed that she was expecting a baby. Later, the teacher experienced a miscarriage, and shortly after that, Kathy's alleged pregnancy also ended. If these events had unfolded differently, that teacher might have become a victim instead of Jamie. The detectives were determined to extract a confession from Kathy. They were not going to let her leave but needed solid evidence first. There were crucial details that Kathy was not aware of. Despite her persistence, the investigators believed that Jamie was no longer alive. When Kathy and her friend Shelley arrived at the hospital with the child, the placenta was discovered. This raised serious concerns about the childbirth. Normally, placentas remain inside the mother after delivery, leading to suspicions that Kathy had attempted an untrained surgical procedure, similar to a cesarean section. The police interviewed doctors and hospital staff. Experts indicated that if a mother's heart stops, there is typically a window of no more than 5 minutes to save the baby. Kathy was likely aware of this urgency, which may have caused her to act carelessly and make several mistakes that could have endangered her child's life. Detectives believed that Jamie had bled out and died shortly after the brutal procedure began. During the questioning, Kathy began to show signs of distress but did not admit to murder. She continued to weave stories under the detective's pressure, avoiding direct questions, and suggested that she needed to be placed in a psychiatric unit, implying she was mentally unstable. In response, the police shifted their approach. Instead of pressuring her further, they tried to soothe her, suggesting that her actions might have been accidental. Their goal was to gather any information they could. Kathy was the last person to see Jamie alive, so all suspicion fell on her. The police continued their investigation due to concerns that she might evade capture. The police questioned those closest to Kathy, but no one could confirm her story. However, detectives eventually gathered important information revealing Kathy's true nature. Her own children shared troubling insights about her. Just 2 weeks before Kathy showed up at the hospital with a baby, she had visited a flea market with her kids and purchased a powerful stun gun. The seller warned that this model could incapacitate an adult with direct contact. While testing it, Kathy approached a large stranger at the market and waved the stun gun in front of him. When he remained unfazed, she pressed it against his leg, causing him to collapse. Pleased with her actions, Kathy laughed and walked away. Under pressure from detectives, Kathy began to disclose unsettling details of her plan. She initially wanted to simulate giving birth as realistically as possible, even considering placing the fetus and placenta inside herself. When this proved too complicated, she devised an alternative. Arriving at a friend's house, she sat in the back seat, holding the baby while using cut-out female organs to create the illusion of having just given birth. Regardless, she still refused to reveal Jamie's whereabouts. Her family members confirmed her violent tendencies. In fact, Kathy's own mother was so afraid of her that she took Kathy's children from her first marriage and raised them herself. Shannon's relatives were horrified by Kathy's erratic behavior and urged him to end their relationship. After receiving partial recognition of her situation, Kathy began to elaborate on her belief that she had multiple personalities. She insisted that it was not her, but an alter ego named Lindsay, who approached her friend with the baby. This persona was used to shift the blame for everything that happened to Jamie, although Kathy avoided providing specific details. She frequently mentioned that she belonged in a mental hospital instead of prison. Kathy claimed that when her personality switched, she experienced blackouts and couldn't remember anything. She described instances where she could get into a car, lose touch with reality, and wake up in a completely different part of the city without knowing how she got there. Detectives, however, suspected that Kathy was lying. They discovered that she had previously discussed plans to kidnap another child with her relatives and had even sought her children's assistance. When they refused, she dismissed it as a joke. Kathy's mother recounted how her daughter had repeatedly urged her to help commit murder, but she flatly refused. People who knew Kathy well denied her claims of having a split personality, stating that she had never exhibited such issues before. During the interrogation, Kathy's second personality appeared very self-assured, insisting that no charges could stick to her. Kathy continued to assert that Jamie was alive, despite the severity of Jamie's injuries, which made survival impossible. This bravado quickly faded when Kathy learned she was being accused of murder. After her arrest, Kathy finally agreed to cooperate with the authorities, even leading them to the location of Jamie's body. It was then that the true extent of the crime emerged. Kathy's friendship with Jamie was greatly exaggerated. In reality, Jamie had been another victim of Kathy, who had been stalking her. Kathy had lured Jamie into meetings with gifts and promises of a job. She brought the police to a wooded area where Jamie's body was found, badly mutilated and lifeless, with signs of being shocked by a stun gun on her neck. This was the same stun gun that Kathy had purchased at a flea market with her children just 2 weeks prior to the crime. When Jamie's body was discovered, it was revealed that she had died from multiple stab wounds and excessive blood loss. Kathy had immobilized her with an electric shock gun and then performed a cesarean section in the forest. This is why the baby was found covered in grass and dirt when Kathy brought him to her friend's house. Kathy admitted that she hadn't researched adequately to prepare for such a dangerous procedure. She only looked online once and thought that was sufficient, which was clearly inadequate for someone without any medical training. Kathy, who was 40 years old, was charged with first-degree murder, as well as kidnapping both an adult and a baby. In court, she cried and pleaded guilty to the charges of kidnapping and murder. The baby she had taken from Jamie survived and was later named Isaiah Allen Stice Reynolds, honoring his late mother with his second surname. He was placed with his father. Kathy sent letters to her children explaining what had happened, but those letters contained many lies. She was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her children were placed in a foster home, and her husband remarried, finding a stable partner. In interviews, Kathy's children stated that on the day of the crime, their mother appeared completely normal and was not anxious about the act she was committing. During the trial, Kathy's stepfather expressed his sorrow, not primarily for his relationship with Kathy, but because he was relieved that she could no longer harm anyone. He also felt deep remorse over Jamie's death, regretting that he hadn't reported Kathy to the police after she confessed her intention to kill, believing that doing so might have saved Jamie's life. The case of Jamie Stice is a chilling story of despair, deceit, and unspeakable acts of brutality. Set in the peaceful small town of Morgantown, Kentucky, this tragedy reveals the dark side of the desire to become a mother, leading Kathy Coy down an unforgivable path of crime. Jamie Stice, a young pregnant woman filled with hopes for the future, became a victim of manipulation and horrifying violence, leaving her son, Isaiah Allen Stice Reynolds, motherless from the moment he was born. Kathy was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole and must pay for her sins. However, the pain she inflicted on Jamie's family and her own is irreparable. This case serves not only as a warning about the destructive power of deceit but also raises questions about the boundary between love and obsession. Crime lovers, what do you think about this haunting ending? Leave your thoughts. Chelsea King was born on July 2, 1992, in Poway, California. After her birth, her parents, Brent and Kelly King, faced some challenges. A medical error during childbirth resulted in Kelly developing Asherman syndrome, a condition in which scar tissue forms in the uterus or cervix. Despite these difficulties, Chelsea was very close to her family, especially her younger brother, and made a point to spend quality time with them. The King family moved frequently, first to the Bay Area in San Francisco, then to Naperville, Illinois, and finally settling in Poway, San Diego County, California. By 2007, Chelsea was a bright and cheerful student, earning an A grade in high school and maintaining a GPA of 3.2. She is a vegetarian who loves nature, as evident from her enjoyment of walking in the park. She and her friends even planned a cleanup of the Bernardo Ranch Community Park, which she visited on February 25, 2010. On that day, Chelsea left home at 6:15 a.m. and usually returned by 5 p.m. When 6 p.m. arrived without her return or any communication, her parents became concerned. They discovered her phone was turned off, prompting them to call her friends to check on her whereabouts. To their dismay, none of her friends knew her plans, and no one had seen her since she left school. This sparked fear in her parents. Chelsea's father, Brent, decided to track her phone through AT&T and discovered that it was near Bernardo Ranch Park. He immediately went there to search for her and found her car, with her school uniform and handbag in the back seat. Chelsea loved to run and frequently organized solo runs before returning home. However, she had recently lost consciousness during one of her jogs. Connecting the dots, Brent decided to call the police, fearing that his daughter might have fainted again while running and could be unable to seek help. The search for Chelsea involved not only the police but also support from the local community. They noticed disturbing similarities to a disappearance that had occurred the year before. The community quickly formed a volunteer group to support the King family. Her mother, Kelly, expressed deep gratitude, stating that their help was truly encouraging. Search teams, including dog handlers, helicopters, and volunteers on foot, scoured Chelsea's usual routes, the park, and the area around her home. During the search, some clues were discovered along the path, including her underwear and shoes. Forensic scientist Mary Schiffer examined blood found on the underwear, and DNA testing confirmed that it belonged to Chelsea. Additionally, shocking findings revealed the presence of biological fluid from a man on the underwear. This fluid was cross-referenced with police databases and matched to 31-year-old John Albert Gardner. John is also a suspect in another case, the disappearance of Amber Dubois, a 14-year-old girl. There were rumors in the community that Amber had run away with someone she met online. On February 13, 2009, 14-year-old Amber Dubois, from Escondido, California, went missing while heading to Escondido High School. Born on October 25, 1994, Amber lived with her mother, Carrie McGonigal, and her mother's boyfriend, David Cave, but she often spent weekends with her father, Mo Dubois. That day was cold and rainy, and Amber's classes typically ended around 2:45 p.m. She usually returned home about an hour after school. When she didn't come home, her parents grew concerned. David went to the school to pick her up, but the teacher informed him that she had not been there that day. Immediately, David and Carrie filed a missing person report, and the police in Escondido began to investigate. Friends and family joined the search, but there was no sign of Amber. Her parents felt a glimmer of hope when investigators revealed that her phone had been briefly activated. The police then urged all residents of Escondido to report any information they might have about Amber's whereabouts. Some individuals claimed to have seen Amber in the days before her disappearance. These accounts suggested that she might not have been kidnapped but could have run away. Despite that, her mother, Carrie, insisted that Amber would never voluntarily leave home, but she could not convince the authorities to agree with her opinion. Renaissance High School organized a search and rescue effort, in which officers and volunteers distributed flyers and searched the area for clues. David, who was the last person to communicate with Amber before she went missing, took a lie detector test 8 times, with all results coming back negative. Yet, Carrie continued to harbor suspicions about him. John Albert Gardner was born on April 9, 1979, in Culver City, California. Due to his father's alcoholism and his mother's long work hours, John often stayed with relatives who took care of him. He became close to his older cousins, Shannon and Serena. From a young age, John struggled with constant allergies, ear infections, and asthma, which made him restless and selective. As he got older, his behavior grew worse. By age 4, he had significant impulse control issues and needed medication at school to help him focus. He exhibited frequent outbursts of anger, spoke of self-harm, and expressed feelings of self-hatred. As his condition failed to improve, he became depressed, especially when he couldn't take his medication at night. In February 1989, John was hospitalized at UCLA, where he was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and emotional issues. Doctors observed that he tended to be aggressive toward peers and often lost control. At the age of 21, John assaulted a 30-year-old neighbor and faced charges for both the assault and abuse. Initially, he denied both allegations but later admitted to hitting the woman while maintaining that he did not abuse her. In 2000, he was convicted of the assault and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Throughout this time, he claimed to be a victim of the legal system despite substantial evidence against him. John's mother, Kathy Osborne, testified in court that her son attacked the woman because he believed she was in love with him and pleaded for him to receive psychiatric treatment instead of prison. The court denied her request, and he was sentenced to incarceration. John, 31 years old, saw a decline in his mental health and often considered self-harm. On February 19, 2010, he was taken to the hospital after consuming a large dose of the drug Prima, but he was discharged the same day. On the morning of February 24, 2010, John's mother, Kathy, drove for 2 hours to visit John's grandmother. They did not return home until 1 a.m. on February 25. John was not at home at the time and did not answer his mother's phone calls. He eventually returned home around 8 p.m., dirty and carrying a decapitated snake. John claimed that the snake had attacked him and that he had killed it, but he had a deep wound on his nose that did not resemble a snake bite. The following day, while at a nail salon, Kathy saw news about a girl named Chelsea King. Authorities had used DNA evidence to identify a suspect and quickly located John. He was arrested at a bar on the west shore of Lake Hodges. Despite his frantic claims of innocence, the police handcuffed him and took him to the station. When shown a photo of Chelsea, John insisted that he did not know her and mentioned that he had been drinking, which made it hard for him to provide clear answers. The detectives, however, noticed that he was not so intoxicated that he couldn't understand their questions. They detected alcohol on him and observed his muddy pants. John claimed he had fallen while walking to the bar and insisted he only knew Chelsea from the news. During the interrogation, his demeanor changed frequently, and he claimed he was a victim of false accusations, similar to a previous arrest in 1991. He even made a peculiar remark about being accused in the case of Amber's disappearance, which alarmed the detectives, as they hadn't mentioned Amber's name during the questioning about Chelsea. The investigators showed John a photo of Chelsea and asked him where her body was, but he insisted he didn't know anything. However, when they briefly left the room, John looked at Chelsea's photo and cursed under his breath. Frustrated by the lack of evidence, the detectives had to let him go. Soon after, a report surfaced about an attack on a girl the previous year involving a man who resembled John. On December 27, 2009, 22-year-old Candice Moncayo went for a jog around Lake Hodges. It was a nice day, and she completed her run around 10:30 a.m. At that moment, a tall stranger with brown hair approached her. He knocked her to the ground and used his weight to pin her down. Candice realized he intended to assault her, so she decided to fight back. She got up and elbowed him in the nose with enough force to possibly break it. Seizing the opportunity, she ran away and called 911. Although the police responded to the scene, they couldn't locate the attacker. Investigators suspect that a tall man with a broken nose may be involved, but they believe the incident is more likely to be a robbery than abuse. They are questioning Candice regarding Chelsea's case. They showed her a photo of John, and she immediately recognized him as her attacker. Nevertheless, John's mother, Kathy Osborne, completely denied all allegations against her son. Detectives hoped to persuade her to confess to John's crimes by informing her of his other offenses and the evidence they had. They stressed the urgency of finding Chelsea and warned that John posed a threat to others in the community. During an interview with a Justice Department agent, Kathy explained that John was on medication for his mental health, which helped him manage depression and panic attacks. She described him as kind-hearted, despite occasional outbursts of anger. On the day of the attack, he had gone for one of his regular walks, although she did not specify the location. After that, Kathy stopped providing further information. The investigators then circulated John's photo through various media outlets, leading to more witnesses coming forward with testimonies against him. Several claimed to have seen him following Chelsea during her jog, and some even reported that he spoke to them, making them feel uncomfortable. On March 2, 2010, FBI agents began searching for Chelsea using a boat on the south shore of Lake Hodges. During the search, they discovered blonde hair in the mud near the shore. Chelsea's body was ultimately found about 10 feet from where her shoe had been located earlier. Bad weather had previously hindered search efforts. After the discovery, authorities informed Chelsea's family about the tragic news. With the body found and John in custody, prosecutors announced they would pursue the death penalty against him. In response, John's attorneys worked to negotiate a plea deal. They reached an agreement with the San Diego prosecutor. John would assist in locating Amber's body in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. John honored his part of the deal and led investigators to Amber's remains, remaining surprisingly calm and even smoking cigarettes during the process. He indicated a shallow grave but admitted to discarding Amber's clothing and belongings. Ultimately, Amber's body was never found. However, a clump of hair identified as hers was discovered. Carrie, Mo, and David were summoned to the police station, where they learned that some of Amber's remains had been located, but not her entire body. The police and medical personnel could not provide a clear understanding of what had happened to Amber. It became clear that the investigations into Chelsea's and Amber's cases were being managed differently. In response, Amber's mother, Carrie, appeared on the talk show Larry King Live, expressing her frustration about not being updated on her daughter's case and directly urging John to confess to the crimes. After Carrie expressed her disappointment on Larry King's live show about not being informed regarding her daughter's disappearance, the district attorney notified Chelsea's family that John had pleaded guilty in order to avoid the death penalty. He admitted to committing crimes against Amber Dubois and Candace Moncayo. Chelsea's family was understandably upset, but they felt they had no choice but to accept the plea deal. The district attorney knew that publicly announcing John's escape from the death penalty would likely incite anger not only in San Diego but also throughout the state and the country. On April 25, 2010, despite his lawyer's advice to stay silent, John chose to speak out. He asked the judge and his attorneys for permission to appear on TV to publicly apologize to the victims' families. He confessed to his crimes, expressed self-hatred, and conveyed regret for his actions. However, many people remained doubtful of his sincerity. In relation to these cases, a book titled Lost Girls, authored by Kathleen Rother, was published. When the author informed John about the book, he requested that she sign it, expressing his desire to officially confess to his crimes and seek forgiveness. The families of the victims were furious about John's actions. They pointed out that he had previously stated he did not understand remorse, making his attempt to apologize feel insincere. During the sentencing, despite his attorney's suggestion to remain composed, John became emotional. When Carrie, Mo, and David described Amber and her kind personality, John cried repeatedly. They looked him straight in the eye and said that he had taken away their beloved daughter, her bright future and her innocence. David hoped that John's prison experience would be unbearable due to his cellmates. Next, Chelsea's parents, Brent and Kelly, spoke about Chelsea, highlighting her positive impact on the world and her ability to see the goodness in others. According to them, she was always brave, while they considered John to be cowardly for hiding behind his mental illness. They believed he portrayed himself as a victim, even though he was fully aware of his cruel actions when he killed both girls. Brent and Kelly expressed their grief over losing all the memories they could have shared with Chelsea. Brent specifically described John as a monster and a sociopath unworthy of mercy. While they spoke, John looked down, crying, as if showing his regret. When it was Candace's turn to testify, she directed her question at John, asking how his nose had healed. This seemingly innocent question triggered a reaction in him. He growled, bared his teeth, and sat with a wild look on his face. At one point, John turned to his lawyer and claimed that Candace never hit him and was simply lying. In that moment, people saw the true John, not as a victim, but as a monster. During numerous discussions with investigators, he confessed to multiple other crimes, revealing that he had many more victims beyond Amber and Chelsea. He admitted to violently assaulting an escort several times and stalking women, although all of his attacks ultimately failed. Finally, he received 3 consecutive life sentences without the chance of parole. This case sparked outrage not only among residents of San Diego but also around the world, especially since John avoided the death penalty, raising concerns about the justice system. Chelsea's family, motivated to prevent others from going through what their daughter experienced, established the Chelsea Act. This legislation increases penalties, parole restrictions, and oversight for the most serious crimes. Under this act, individuals convicted of child abuse offenses face life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Afterward, the residents of the city gathered for a candlelight vigil in memory of Amber and Chelsea, praying for their souls to find peace. Almost nothing is known about Derek Benson other than that he was born in Ireland in 1967 and was emotionally unstable throughout his life. There is no information about his parents or siblings. In his youth, he lived alone, which is not surprising given his explosive nature and sudden outbursts of anger. By a twist of fate, Derek crossed paths with Jackie Noble. We know little about her family and personal life, but there is information that since her teenage years, Jackie faced constant challenges. With a thin build, pale skin, and curly brown hair, she was a girl who never considered herself beautiful, which led to a number of complexes and self-doubt. To cope with shyness and low self-esteem, Jackie became addicted to alcohol at a very young age. She also began to experiment with illegal substances. Jackie did not stray from this chosen path even when she met Derek, and a romantic relationship soon developed between them. Moreover, they began to drink alcohol together. Those who knew Derek considered him to have an unstable character, sometimes aggressive, especially when he was drunk or under the influence of substances. Nevertheless, Jackie liked this rebellious spirit in him, and soon she moved with him to Ballymun, a northern suburb of Dublin. Their relationship was full of quarrels, and conflicts arose more and more frequently. According to Jackie, Derek was extremely cruel and sought to keep everything under his control. If she disobeyed him or did not do what he wanted, he insulted and beat her, even in front of others. Jackie hoped that their relationship would improve when their daughter, Kelly Noble, was born in 1986. Although at first, the arrival of the baby did contribute to taming Derek's violent temper, as the girl grew up, she too became the object of her father's uncontrollable anger. According to court records, in 1993, when Kelly was just over 6 years old, she was examined at the St. Clair's unit on Temple Street, which deals with suspected victims of bullying. However, the complaint filed with the Irish police was later withdrawn, as Jackie retracted her accusations. According to officers, Jackie changed her mind because Derek intimidated her. Additionally, some claimed that he not only subjected her to physical and mental abuse but also forced her to assist him in using a whole arsenal of devices meant for illegal substances. Thus, the unfortunate child turned into another victim on whom the angry father could unleash his negative emotions and involve her in his perversions. Neighbors noticed how Derek humiliated and beat his partner, but apparently, no one took any measures to stop this violence. Claire, a woman who lived in a neighboring apartment, later reported that one day, upon seeing Jackie, she noticed her very swollen hand and asked what had happened. Jackie revealed that Derek had hit her with a board because she had not gotten up to make him breakfast. The neighbor also recalled an incident when Jackie ran to her for help, being pursued by her husband. According to Claire, she and her sister clearly saw how Derek beat and kicked Jackie, making her a victim once again. Claire advised Jackie to leave Derek, but she claimed that he threatened to kill her if she did. It is hard to believe that this unfortunate woman endured terrible abuse for 10 years. According to court documents, there is medical evidence that on various occasions, Jackie was hospitalized and treated for injuries sustained during beatings, including hematomas and broken ribs. Derek often abused Jackie, even when their little daughter was nearby. The girl described in detail how her father tied her mother to a chair or bed when he committed his disgusting acts. According to her story, he would wield a bag and threaten her with sharp objects, simulating abuse assault. The boiling point for Jackie came in 1997 when she finally mustered the courage to take her daughter and go to her parents in her hometown of Nouthcourt. Given the history of domestic violence in the family, Jackie quickly received a protection order against Derek. However, he soon violated it after the complaint was accepted. The police arrested him. Later, Jackie stated that Derek tried to knock her down and push her down the stairs at the police station in Ballymun. So, Derek spent some time behind bars. In early 2000, Jackie's parents died, and it seems she was due to inherit a considerable sum of money and her father's property. Although at the time they were divorced and she was still under a protective order, Derek somehow managed to get close to his ex-partner again, demand some of the money he believed belonged to him. He wanted to buy a motorcycle and a yacht. Derek could not imagine that his inflated ambitions would provoke the wrath of the seemingly submissive woman with whom he had lived for more than 14 years. His demand for a share of the money brought up all the grievances that had accumulated over their years together. At that time, a third character entered the story, Paul Hopkins. Paul made a living as a doorman at a bar in Drumcondra, where Jackie often went to relax. It seemed he had long been familiar with both her and Derek and lived relatively close to the apartment that them rented on Sandy Hill Avenue. At that time, Paul was living with a young woman and raising a daughter. According to rumors, Paul had been friends with Derek, but for unknown reasons, they became sworn enemies. According to subsequent statements from Paul, over the course of 4 years, Derek had threatened and attacked him at least 5 times. Paul claimed that one night Jackie came to the bar where he worked, and when he stepped outside to smoke, he saw her crying. When he asked her about the reason for her tears, Paul heard a story about the horrors Derek had committed against Jackie's, as well as Derek's desire to deprive her of her rightful inheritance. In addition, Jackie told Paul about Derek's alleged abuse of their daughter. There are 2 versions of what happened after this conversation. According to Paul, he deliberately proposed a plan to Jackie that would allow him to achieve two goals simultaneously. On one hand, he would free Jackie from a nightmare that had lasted for many years, and on the other hand, he would protect his own family. According to him, while he was in the city of Boston for educational courses, Derek allegedly threatened his girlfriend. Supposedly, the sadist told his girlfriend that he would burn her and her daughter after he was finished with them. For Paul, this meant that Derek would abuse his partner and child before taking their lives. The version later presented by investigators indicates that Jackie hired Paul to kill her violent partner. As a reward, she promised him between 3,000 to 5,000 Irish pounds. They met on May 11, 2000, to clarify the details of the crime they were preparing, and 2 days later, they carried it out. As part of their agreement, Jackie gave Paul an advance of 200 Irish pounds, equivalent to about €276. At the meeting, Paul provided sleeping pills and a mobile phone so that she could warn him when Derek was vulnerable. That same day, Paul bought a Japanese katana sword from his brother. According to his own statement, his brother sold him the weapon for 50 Irish pounds, not suspecting that it would be used for murder. Finally, on May 13th of that year, Jackie and Paul executed their plan. That day, Derek was recovering from dental treatment in his apartment. Jackie showed up there, caringly offering him her help. However, instead of the prescribed painkillers, she gave Derek a cocktail of sleeping pills that had been provided by her accomplice. After assuring that everything was fine, Jackie called Paul, notifying him that the next stage of the plan was ready. She then left the apartment. Around 3 a.m., locals, including a neighbor, reported hearing screams from Derek's apartment. Shortly after that, they saw a column of smoke rising from the building and flames bursting from the fire, prompting them to call for help. Witnesses claimed they saw Paul leaving the apartment. When rescuers entered to find Derek and help him escape, they were met with a horrific sight. In the bedroom, they found the lifeless body of Derek covered in terrible wounds. He was pronounced dead. The investigation began quickly to uncover the truth behind this shocking incident. Officers cordoned off the area and began questioning local residents. Evidence collected at the scene and eyewitness accounts pointed to two suspects. Meanwhile, the remains of the victim were taken to the morgue for a thorough examination. Dr. Marie Cassidy, then deputy state pathologist, said Derek had 25 injuries to his head and neck. One of them was an open wound that cut into his cervical spine and a cutting or slashing wound, as if someone had tried to cut off his head. She said Derek had injuries to his arms, hands, severing several tendons. Several cuts to his forearms and palms consistent with defensive injuries. Dr. Cassidy said the injuries Benson suffered were consistent with a sustained and brutal attack. The direction of the wound suggested that, at some stage, the deceased had been lying on the ground during the attack. The report also concluded that the weapon used to commit the murder was likely a samurai sword, as the wounds were exceedingly deep. The sword was later found in a cupboard at the home of a close friend of Paul, who also worked with him. Paul and Jackie were brought to trial for their alleged involvement in the plot to murder Derek. In late January 2004, 38-year-old Jackie Noble and 24-year-old Paul Hopkins appeared at Dublin Central Criminal Court. However, both pleaded not guilty to the charges and were sentenced to 30 days. The court heard details of the physical and emotional abuse Jackie suffered at the hands of her former partner, who was also accused of allegedly abusing their young daughter. In her testimony, Jackie described how Derek had harmed her during his rages. Witnesses, including neighbors and relatives, confirmed that he regularly beat her. As evidence, the defendant's lawyer, Mary, presented records of Jackie's hospitalization due to domestic violence, as well as a restraining order that had been issued in her favor, which Derek later violated. To support her claims, Mary subpoenaed the police officer involved in Derek's arrest, who testified about an incident where Derek had attempted to push Jackie down the stairs at the police station. However, the trial judge ruled that psychological tests conducted on Jackie as part of her defense were inadmissible. Paul also spoke about the threats Derek had made against his ex-girlfriend and detailed how Derek had repeatedly attacked her. When his defense attorney asked what he intended to do when he entered Derek's apartment with a sword, Paul replied that he only wanted to scare him. However, things escalated when Derek suddenly jumped out of bed and they began to fight. When the sword fell to the floor, Derek picked it up and threw it at Paul, cutting his fingers. In that moment, Paul lost control of himself, grabbed the weapon, and violently attacked Derek, after which he was unable to stop. Upon realizing what he had done, Paul was terrified. He described Derek as a psychopath, noting that he had drawn the child into his nightmarish actions, but Paul had never intended to kill him. However, prosecutor Tom O'Connell classified the case as a contract killing. According to him, Jackie had agreed with Paul on a payment of 3,000 to 5,000 Irish pounds for the elimination of Derek. Tom stated that while the accused intended to devise a plan for capture, it was executed in the most tragic manner. Tom told the Central Criminal Court jury that Mr. Benson had suffered 25 stab wounds with the sword and 60 cuts or slashing wounds. In 7 stab wounds to the torso, the sword had passed through the entire body from back to front and from front to back. The number of injuries sustained by the victim due to his unexpected reaction was so extensive that Paul decided to set fire to the apartment in an attempt to hide the evidence, which was beyond the original plan. The prosecutor also told the Central Criminal Court jury that Jackie's motive was to protect herself and her daughter from an insane man. The jury also heard evidence from pathologist Marie Cassidy, who read her statement for almost an hour. In her statement, she noted that the multiple injuries sustained by the victim were inflicted during a brutal and sustained attack. In addition to this evidence, the prosecution was based on the fact that the perpetrators had planned the murder in advance. This was substantiated by the purchase of sleeping pills, a samurai's sword for the murder, and a telephone for communication between them during the commission of the crime. After 7 hours of deliberation, the jury in the Central Criminal Court unanimously found the accused guilty of murder. The judge sentenced Jackie Noble and Paul Hopkins to life in prison. After the verdict was announced, both Jackie and Paul cried. Jackie's relatives and friends also cried. Jackie was sent to the Women's Centre in Mountjoy Prison in Dublin, while Paul was to serve his sentence in Luffin House Prison in County Cavan. One might think that with the imprisonment of Jackie and Paul, the murder would be classified as one of the most brutal crimes in Ireland. However, the cycle of violence in which the family of the deceased was involved led to unthinkable consequences for one of the most vulnerable characters in this story, Jackie's daughter, Kelly, who was left to cope with the death of her father and the arrest of her mother. She was hospitalized and subsequently transferred to a state facility in Laytown, County Meath. At that time, she had already given birth to a daughter. Unfortunately, she repeated many of the fates of her parents. She broke the law several times. Kelly received more than 10 sentences for various crimes, including theft, possession of illegal substances, and bladed weapons. The most serious crime occurred in June 2006 when she, 20, was jailed for manslaughter and the stabbing of a 19-year-old. She was initially sentenced to 10 years in prison, with the last 2 years suspended. However, an appeals court reduced the sentence to 8 years, with 2 suspended years. While serving her sentence, Kelly ended up behind bars with her mother. Jackie used her imprisonment to finally give up drinking and ban substance, which she regarded as her great achievement. One would think that being in prison and witnessing the positive example set by her mother would lead Kelly to learn a lesson, but this was not the case. After 6 years, in 2012, Kelly was released, but her problems with the law did not end. In September 2017, she was arrested after a series of thefts and attempted thefts in South Great George's Street. Meanwhile, after 14 years, Jackie, who was then 51 years old, was released in June 2018. She tried to find a job in Dublin and spent a lot of time with her family, taking care of her grandchildren. In an interview, Jackie noted that nothing could change what had happened, but she would like to write a book about her story and the domestic violence that many Irish women face in silence. Kelly faced problems again in October 2020 when she was accused of robbing a woman of her bag and cash. She was sentenced to additional months in prison for breaking and entering, but she was released after being found pregnant. The story of this crime, deemed one of the worst, took another turn in 2022. After serving 2 years in prison for the murder of Derek Benson with a samurai sword, Paul was released from Logan House Prison in County Cavan. This happened just before Christmas. Jackie and Paul are now on parole, with the possibility that their life sentences could be reactivated if they commit another crime. Although Jackie was not directly the perpetrator of the murder, her name was included in a list of the most dangerous women in Ireland. For some, Jackie's decision to hire Paul to do the violent work was the result of many years of prolonged violence that she suffered. As the judge who sentenced them stated, Derek's actions, no matter how terrible, reflect a familiar but often ignored moral. Those embroiled in cycles of violence can find it extremely difficult to escape the path of self-destruction. On January 17, 1999, a man called 911 to report that he had found a woman unresponsive in her home. He was a friend of the victim, Miriam Illes, and had gone to check on her because she hadn't been answering his calls. When he arrived at her house, he discovered that it was locked and none of the doors would open. Looking through a window, he saw Miriam lying on the kitchen floor, clearly deceased. When the police arrived and entered the house, they found that she had been attacked in the back, specifically targeting her heart area. Investigators spoke with the man who called 911, who provided details about Miriam. She was a homemaker and had previously worked in the medical field. Miriam was active in her local community, and her friends were worried about her that day because she hadn't attended Sunday school. She was well-liked and devoted mother to a young boy, Richie. Everyone who knew her believed she had no enemies, which made her death in her locked kitchen even more perplexing. Determining Miriam's time of death was crucial, but without witnesses, the exact timing was uncertain. Police officers meticulously searched the crime scene for evidence, noting that the house appeared undisturbed and showed no signs of forced entry. All external doors to the house and garage were locked when Miriam's body was found. A telephone receiver lay near her hand, suggesting that she may have been on the phone when she was attacked, potentially catching her off guard and leaving her unaware of her attacker. Investigators also requested a report from the phone company to find out about Miriam's recent calls. While examining the crime scene to determine how the attacker entered and exited the house, detectives made a significant discovery. They found a bullet hole in a double-glazed window located just above the kitchen sink. This indicated that the person who shot Miriam was positioned outside. It appeared that Miriam had been standing, leaning against the sink, talking on the phone when she was shot. This single bullet became the key piece of evidence. Tracing the bullet's path, investigators followed it to a creek bed behind Miriam's house. As the investigation progressed, the forensics team found footprints left by size 14 Reebok basketball shoes. The placement of the tracks suggested that someone had taken a shooting stance next to a tree located right behind the kitchen window. The detectives also found a cigarette butt at the shooting site. Further searching revealed a homemade silencer, leading investigators to conclude that the crime was premeditated. The attacker had been hiding behind the tree, waiting for the right moment, smoking a cigarette, and seemed to act with intent. However, the motive behind the crime remained unclear. It did not appear that Miriam was involved in any illegal activities or taking risks that would endanger her. Investigators aimed to gather more information from Miriam's husband, Richard Illes, who arrived at the crime scene while they were there. Richard was a well-known cardiothoracic surgeon at Williamsport Hospital and had saved many lives. He met Miriam in the early 90s while serving as a resident at St. Louis Medical Center, where she worked as a surgical assistant. After marrying, they had a son named Richie and moved to Williamsport, where they both worked together. Miriam was active in her community, engaging in volunteer work at the Symphony in church. Her vibrant personality made her well-liked among friends. Despite their wealth and status, Miriam's friends described her as down-to-earth, noting that they were among the richest people in Williamsport. Then she decided to become a stay-at-home mom, quitting her job when Richie was 2 years old and never returning to work. When Miriam was murdered in her own home, Richard became a primary focus for investigators. He told them that the last time he saw Miriam was 2 days earlier, on Friday, January 15, 1999, around 5 p.m., when he visited her before planning to travel to Chester County, Pennsylvania, to visit family. Detectives soon learned that Miriam and Richard had recently separated after 8 years of marriage, with Miriam moving out of their family home to the house where she was later found dead. She had primary custody of their son, Richie, while Richard visited the boy every weekend. Their ongoing divorce raised potential motives, prompting investigators to closely examine their relationship. Richard's behavior struck detectives as unusual. The first question he asked upon learning of Miriam's death was about the evidence that had been found, which seemed odd for someone who had just learned that his wife of 8 years and the mother of his child was dead. Additionally, Richard made an intriguing confession. He was familiar with firearms, having participated in hunting and owned guns, a common practice in the area. There was nothing particularly unusual about this admission. Investigators examined Richard's firearms to check for any connections to the crime scene. They determined that the bullet that killed Miriam was a .22 caliber, indicating the type of weapon they needed to find. Richard had several .22 caliber rifles, which the police confiscated for analysis. He became the primary suspect due to having a motive, access to weapons, and the skills necessary to commit the crime. The intense emotions in romantic relationships can shift from love to hate, which could have played a role in Miriam's death. While the weapon was being analyzed in the forensic lab, investigators looked further into Richard's personal life. As a cardiothoracic surgeon, he had a high income, but he was also paying a significant amount in child support, around $112,000 a month. This financial burden could have motivated him to want his wife dead. Investigators sought to clarify Richard's whereabouts at the time Miriam was attacked. Although Richard was supposed to pick up his son Richie that Friday evening, he opted to spend the weekend with his sister, who lived 2.5 hours away in Honeybrook, Pennsylvania. He had a witness, Nancy Mitch, who could confirm the start of his trip. Nancy informed the investigators that she was with Miriam when Miriam handed over her son, Richie, to Richard. He picked up Richie around 5 p.m., and after Nancy left, Miriam seemed to be fine. The last confirmed sighting of Miriam was around 6 p.m. on Friday, January 15th. The police established that Richard took Richie from Miriam's home and left while Miriam stayed behind, and everything seemed normal. Richard told investigators that he made a quick stop before going to his sister's house. He first stopped at his own home around 9:30 p.m. and then traveled toward southeastern Pennsylvania. He stated that they reached Lewisburg and stopped at a fast food restaurant around 10 p.m. due to bad weather that evening. He called his sister at 11:24 p.m. to inform her that they would spend the night near Harrisburg. Nancy confirmed part of Richard's alibi, prompting detectives to verify the rest of his statements. They checked Richard's cell phone records, which confirmed his call to his sister. He also had a hotel receipt from the Harrisburg area, where he checked in at 12:57 a.m. This corroborated Richard's account, indicating that he could not have been at the crime scene when Miriam was attacked. An examination of Richard's rifles showed that none matched the murder weapon, and the silencer found at the crime scene did not fit any of his rifles either. Furthermore, DNA samples from the silencer and a cigarette but did not match Richard's DNA. As the investigation progressed, police discovered that Richard had been having an affair with Catherine Swoyer, a colleague at Williamsport Hospital, which contributed to his separation from Miriam. His relationship with Miriam had begun similarly. He worked with her, they formed a bond, and eventually got married. A similar pattern occurred with Catherine. She worked with Richard, leading to their affair. This information led investigators to consider a possible love triangle. Catherine might have had a motive to kill Miriam in order to eliminate any chance of Richard reconciling with his wife. Jealousy can often drive people to commit terrible acts, but there were additional factors at play. In the event of a divorce, Richard and Miriam would need to divide their assets and finances. Furthermore, if they divorce, Richie is likely to stay with Miriam, which would require Richard to pay child support. Therefore, Miriam's death could be advantageous for both Richard and Catherine. Detectives aimed to determine Catherine's whereabouts at the time of Miriam's death. If Richard had left town to visit family, it would have given Catherine the opportunity to commit the murder. However, investigators confirmed that Catherine was out of town visiting relatives and could not have been involved in the crime. This left the police without any other suspects, as both Richard and Catherine had alibis. Then, an unexpected development emerged when a person claiming to be the murderer contacted the detectives by sending letters to the police station. The first anonymous letter stated that the writer was responsible for Miriam's murder. Detectives were perplexed, as this was an unusual occurrence. Initially, they suspected it might be a prank, possibly from teenagers or someone loosely connected to the case. The writer referred to himself as a soldier of God and a soldier of death, claiming that Miriam was a bad and immoral person. The letter was both confusing and unsettling. Despite attempts to make contact, the writer took great care to hide his identity. The letters were examined for fingerprints, but none were found. They were handwritten in block letters with a pencil, making it difficult for police to analyze the handwriting. While investigators were trying to make sense of the first letter, a second letter arrived, written in a different style and showing signs of arrogance and intellectual superiority. This new letter pointed to a potential suspect, as the author mentioned having multiple academic degrees, suggesting that the crime could have been committed by someone connected to Richard's professional circle. Investigators identified Dr. Ench Zama, Richard's close friend, as the most likely suspect. Zama was described as a tall man, likely with large feet, possibly in size 14. He became a key focus for investigators regarding the anonymous letters. During questioning, he examined both letters and suggested that someone might be trying to frame him. He denied any involvement in Miriam's death and claimed he was with friends at the time of the crime. The investigators verified his alibi and confirmed that he could not have attacked Miriam. The anonymous letters were also analyzed for DNA, revealing a black hair on the sealed flap of one envelope. The DNA did not match Zama or any other samples from the crime scene. This led investigators to suspect that someone was deliberately trying to mislead them. It seemed the letter writer had taken great care to hide their identity, but did they accidentally leave behind a hair? Investigators theorized that the hair was intentionally included to confuse them, as it belonged to someone unrelated to the case. They began to suspect that false evidence had been planted. The silencer with DNA, the cigarette butt, and the letters all suggested a deliberate effort to mislead the investigation. Investigators ended up with 4 DNA samples, each belonging to different individuals. The perpetrator had cleverly planted false evidence, hoping to mislead the police and hinder the investigation. However, investigators received the crucial information they had been waiting for since the first day of the investigation, when Miriam's body was discovered. Near her body, they found a phone receiver. Upon reviewing the phone records, they learned that Miriam had been on a call with a friend throughout the evening. When detectives met with this friend, she recounted that during their conversation, she heard glass breaking and then heard Miriam exclaim, "Oh my God." After that, she heard nothing more and hung up. When she called back, she received a busy signal, leading her to assume that the call had been disconnected and that Miriam was talking to someone else. This piece of information provided detectives with the key detail they had been missing. The call ended at 10:37 p.m., which corresponded exactly with the time of Miriam's death. This was significant for the investigation. With the established time of death, detectives revisited the alibis of all potential suspects. Richard's alibi appeared less credible. Initially, he claimed to have been in the Williamsport area and said he was heading south on Highway 15 by 10 p.m. He mentioned stopping for a meal at a restaurant, and if he had truly been at the restaurant at that time, he would not have been able to commit the crime. However, investigators could not verify his presence there at that time, which weakened his alibi. Then, at 11:24 p.m., Richard called his sister to inform her that he and Richie would need to stay at a hotel. This call became crucial for the investigation. Detectives began to trace Richard's cell phone location at the time of the call, which altered the direction of the investigation. The cell phone company provided coverage maps, allowing police to estimate where Richard made the call. They found that Richard had enough time to commit the crime and reach the hotel, where he checked in at 12:57 a.m. Detectives retraced the route from Miriam's home to the hotel, confirming that Richard could have committed the crime by 10:37 p.m. and still arrived in Harrisburg on time. The distance between the crime scene and the hotel was approximately 100 miles, and despite poor weather conditions, investigators made the trip within the required time frame. Now, Richard was the only suspect without an alibi. While this did not make him guilty, it did raise suspicions. The police needed concrete evidence to link him to the crime. They caught a break when two men walking in the woods found a modified rifle. Finding it unusual, they called the police. The rifle had a shortened barrel, a stock, and an optical sight, but the bolt was missing, and its serial numbers had been erased. It was identified as a rifle that matched the bullet that killed Miriam, and it was found near the road Richard drove on the night of the murder. Experts examined the suppressor found at the crime scene to see if it fit the rifle. They discovered that a screw had been added to the barrel, allowing the suppressor to attach perfectly. The challenge now was to link this weapon to Richard. The rifle was a Savage .23D Hornet, and police learned that Richard had inherited weapons from his father, with only his Aunt Jean being aware of this. A detective spoke with Richard's aunt, Jean, who showed him a photo album. In a black and white photo, she revealed her brother, aka Richard's father, posing with a Savage .23D rifle. Too many coincidences pointed to Richard as a possible perpetrator. He had inherited the rifle along with other guns, but the Savage rifle was missing from his collection. Investigators needed more evidence for a conviction. They found several DNA samples at the scene that did not match Richard's. When the snow melted, they returned to the area where the rifle was found and conducted a detailed search. They discovered a pair of athletic shoes that matched the size and tread pattern of the footprints at the crime scene, indicating that the prints could have been left by the same shoes. The coincidence of the sneakers and rifle found in the woods being linked to the crime was highly unlikely. Experts needed to establish that the shoes belonged to Richard, but the sneakers were size 14, whereas Richard wore size 10. It was possible that he deliberately wore shoes that were not his size to confuse the police. The shoes were sent for forensic analysis. A hair was found on one of the sneakers, and DNA testing revealed that it did not match Richard's. This was another setback for the investigators, but they remained determined. They theorized that Richard had given his son, Richie, sleeping pills to keep him asleep in the car. A further hair test was conducted, this time looking for a match to Richie's DNA instead of Richard's. They found a match based on mitochondrial DNA. Richard had tried to use false DNA to mislead the police, but in the end, his son's DNA linked him to the murder. Investigators believe that Richie's hair accidentally made its way into the sneaker, possibly transferred from another surface when Richard changed shoes. In December 2002, 3 years after Miriam's death, Richard was unexpectedly arrested. He had been clever in planning the crime. He created an alibi, constructed a silencer, and intentionally wore the wrong shoe size. However, he left DNA evidence on the silencer and a cigarette butt. To mislead the investigation, he even mailed a hair to the police, but all the DNA samples turned out to belong to other individuals. Richard destroyed the serial numbers on the rifle to hide his tracks, but it appeared he rushed his alibi since he didn't properly conceal the rifle and boots. Richard had meticulously prepared for this crime, modifying the rifle and making a suppressor, which required considerable time and effort. He chose a weekend for the crime when his son, Richie, was staying with him to prevent his son from witnessing any violence. The plan began on Friday around 5 p.m. when he picked up Richie from Miriam's home. He returned a few hours later, parking approximately half a mile away from her house, and gave his son a sleeping pill to ensure he would sleep through the events that were about to unfold. Richard then walked to a spot by a tree along the creek bed, waiting for the right moment when Miriam was near the kitchen window. He couldn't shoot from any other angle, so he patiently waited for hours. At 10:37 p.m., while she was on the phone with a friend, he took his shot. He left behind evidence, a cigarette butt, intentionally placed where it could be discovered. He then fled the scene, leaving size 14 shoe prints, returned to his car, and drove south. He found a secluded area to dispose of his evidence, getting rid of the rifle and sneakers before heading back. At 11:24 p.m., he called his sister, hoping the phone records would support his alibi, However, they actually indicated that he had sufficient time to commit the murder. Though Richard did not admit to the crime, the jury reached a different conclusion and convicted him. In 2004, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Miriam's family issued a statement describing the situation as tragic, expressing that they felt there were no winners, but they were relieved to finally have closure and justice. Richard attempted to appeal the court's decision, but his efforts were unsuccessful. On April 12, 2018, a seemingly ordinary day turned into a nightmare for the Plattel family. Stephen and his daughter, Katie, were at the center of a horrifying series of events that would forever change not only their lives but the lives of those around them. Hidden beneath the surface of their seemingly ordinary lives, a forbidden love affair had unfolded between Stephen and Katie. An evil family truth was kept in the shadows, but it had to come to light. A series of events would ultimately serve as a tragedy in the lives of those affected by them. Stephen Walter Plattel came from a relatively ordinary upbringing in New York. Little is known about his childhood or adolescence, but during his young adulthood, his life took a dark turn. In 1995, at the age of 20, Stephen met Alyssa Garcia, a 15-year-old girl online. They quickly formed a bond and had an immediate connection. Despite Alyssa's young age, Stephen was drawn to her. The relationship blossomed into a secret romance. Alyssa, a student in high school, was swept away by Stephen's charms and attention. She could not see through the manipulative tactics he was employing to groom her. Stephen carefully cultivated the relationship, keeping it hidden from Alyssa's family and friends. He was so driven by his desires that he traveled from New York all the way to Texas to meet her. Their relationship grew increasingly intense, culminating in Alyssa running away from home to be with Stephen in New York. She cut off ties with her family and friends, blinded by her love for him. Katie, born Denise Plattel in 1998, is the product of a relationship between Alyssa and Stephen. Alyssa was pregnant at the age of 16. As a young child, Katie experienced firsthand the abuse and neglect inflicted on her by her father. From the moment she was born, it quickly became evident that Stephen exhibited concerning traits that would foreshadow the violence to come. According to Alyssa, Stephen's abusive tendencies emerged almost immediately. Alyssa recounted harrowing details of Stephen's treatment of their infant daughter. He would do things like cover her mouth when she cried, pinch her until she turned black and blue, even resort to placing her in a cooler or ice chest to silence her cries. Sometimes he would leave a blanket slightly ajar to let air in, but other times he would shut it completely, forcing Alyssa to wait outside. When she was finally allowed to open it, Alyssa would find Denise gasping for air, drenched in sweat and covered in bruises. Realizing the danger Stephen posed to Denise, Alyssa made the heartbreaking decision to place her daughter for adoption. She knew it was the only way to ensure Denise's safety and give her a chance at a better life. She wanted her daughter to have a future filled with love and security, qualities that were glaringly absent in her home with Stephen. She believed that relinquishing her parental rights was the best choice. Katie, whose name was changed from Denise at the time of her adoption, was taken in by the Fusco family. They provided her with a stable and supportive home, surrounding her with love and encouragement, unaware of the dark secret that connected her to her biological parents. Despite the challenges, Alyssa and Stephen remained together, eventually married in 2006 after Stephen moved to Richmond, Virginia. In 2016, as an adult, Katie felt a strong desire to learn more about her biological family. Driven by curiosity and a need for answers, she started searching for her birth parents. Through social media, she connected with her biological mother, Alyssa. Alyssa, who had been looking for Katie for years, was thrilled to hear from her. After several months of communication online, Katie decided to visit Alyssa in North Carolina. Their first meeting was both joyful and uncertain as they quickly formed a bond. After their reunion, Katie made the tough choice to take a gap year from college and move to North Carolina to live with her biological family. Her adoptive parents had mixed feelings about this decision. They were supportive but also worried about the challenges she might encounter. In August 2016, when Katie chose to live with her biological family, Stephen and Alyssa were already separated and occupying different rooms. Although Alyssa was excited, the living situation was complicated. Stephen was sleeping on the couch, and Alyssa had the bedroom. Katie had her own room, but she often spent time with Stephen and her two younger sisters. Alyssa was thrilled to have Katie with them, but soon she noticed troubling changes in Stephen's behavior. He began wearing tight clothes, growing his hair long, seemingly trying to appear younger and more like Katie. 6 weeks after Katie moved in, Alyssa found out that Stephen had stopped sleeping on the couch and was now on the floor of Katie's bedroom, which alarmed her greatly. Alyssa confronted Stephen about this inappropriate behavior, reminding him of his violent past, advising Katie to be cautious around him. However, Katie dismissed her mother's concerns, believing that her father had changed and that he was trustworthy. This reaction showed how much Katie had already been manipulated, groomed by Stephen. Alyssa grew increasingly unsettled as she noticed how much Katie resembled her younger self. One day, she could no longer ignore the troubling relationship between Stephen and Katie, so she confronted them. This led to a heated argument. 3 months later, in November 2016, Alyssa found the strength to leave Stephen, taking her 2 daughters with her and filing for divorce. This left Stephen and Katie alone in the house to pursue their inappropriate relationship. In May 2017, while cleaning her 11-year-old daughter's room, Alyssa made a shocking discovery. The girl's journal revealed that Stephen and Katie were intimately involved, and that Katie was pregnant with Stephen's child. The children had been instructed to call Katie their stepmother. Alyssa confronted Stephen, who confessed to his relationship with Katie and her pregnancy. Shocked, Alyssa called the police to report their incestuous relationship. Stephen told her that he was deeply in love with Katie, that this love overshadowed their biological connection. Even with the police investigation ongoing, Stephen and Katie persisted in their relationship. On July 20, 2017, they married in Maryland, falsely representing their relationship on their marriage documents. The wedding was attended by Stephen's mother and Katie's adoptive parents, who were aware of the situation but felt they could not intervene. In September 2017, Katie gave birth to their son, Bennett Kieran Plattel. They then moved to Knightdale, North Carolina, hoping for a new beginning. Unfortunately, their happiness was short-lived. In January 2018, they were arrested and charged with incest. As the investigation progressed, the legal complexities of the case became clear. Stephen's defense attorney, Rick Friedman, pointed out that the case was unprecedented and presented unique challenges for the legal system. He argued that the relationship between Stephen and Katie was consensual, denying allegations that Katie had been manipulated or brainwashed by her father. They were released on bond but prohibited from contacting each other. Custody of Bennett was granted to Stephen's mother. Katie returned to live with her adoptive parents, Anthony and Kelly Fusco. Stephen, barred from North Carolina, moved into a hotel in Virginia. On March 16, 2018, the restrictions on Stephen were lifted, allowing him to return to his home in North Carolina, close to his mother, who had custody of his son, Bennett. As time went on, both Stephen and Katie felt emotionally burdened by their situation. A crucial moment came on April 12, 2018, when Katie called Stephen to announce her decision to end their relationship. She expressed her wish for a divorce, explaining that their relationship had become toxic and negatively affected her well-being. Katie shared her need to take back control of her life, focus on her passions for art and digital advertising, which she hoped to study in college, break free from the unhealthy pattern that had trapped her. This choice marked a significant turning point for Katie, as being apart from Stephen allowed her to reflect on how their relationship had involved manipulation and control. Stephen reacted strongly to the news. Furious over Katie's decision, he felt betrayed, which led to a deep emotional turmoil. He believed he needed to retaliate against Katie for what he saw as her abandoning him. Stephen had a history of violent outbursts and unpredictable behavior, indicating he was likely to react extremely. The idea of losing Katie, whom he had manipulated, triggered a powerful reaction in him. Her choice to leave was not just rejection, it felt like a personal insult that he felt he needed to avenge. Studies show that people who act out of anger or jealousy often seek revenge to regain a sense of control. For Stephen, the thought of Katie moving on without him was unbearable. He probably believed that by taking drastic actions, he could assert his dominance again and eliminate the source of his pain. On the evening of April 11, 2018, at about 7 p.m., a tragic series of events unfolded. Steven was filled with anger and desperation. In his turmoil, he called his mother and informed her that he was heading to pick up his 7-month-old son. His intention was to drive to New York City so that Katie could take care of Bennett. However, Steven's emotional state quickly worsened, causing his plans to fall apart. Instead of taking Bennett to see Katie, Steven returned to his home in Knightdale, North Carolina, where he committed the horrific act of murdering his own child. While specific details about Bennett's death remain confidential, reports indicate he died from asphyxiation caused by pressure on his torso, suggesting a deliberate and violent act. After killing Bennett, Steven hid his body in a closet. The tragic events that unfolded on the evening of April 11th were just the beginning. After brutally killing their 7-month-old son, he drove 600 miles from North Carolina to New York. Upon arriving at the home of Katie's adoptive parents, he parked his blue minivan across the street in a nearby liquor store parking lot. From there, he waited and observed the family, anticipating when they would leave for their regular visit to Katie's grandmother's house in Waterbury, Connecticut. On the morning of April 12th, just as expected, Katie and her adoptive father, Anthony, left their home and got into their Toyota pickup truck, completely unaware of the impending danger. Steven trailed them closely in his minivan. When they reached an intersection and stopped at a red light, Steven took his chance. He pulled up next to their truck, rolled down his window, and displayed an AR-15 style rifle. Observers later described the terrifying scene as they saw Steven open fire on the truck, shooting multiple rounds into the cabin. Katie and Anthony were hit several times in critical areas, instantly ending their lives. An off-duty firefighter nearby witnessed the attack and quickly called 911 to report the shooting. Witnesses provided details about the vehicles involved, mentioning a blue minivan with North Carolina plates. When the police arrived, they discovered the bodies of 20-year-old Katie and her 56-year-old adoptive father, Anthony Fusco, still in their seats. The investigation started right away, focusing on finding the vehicle that had escaped the scene. At the same time, Steven's mother panicked after he confessed to her about the murders Bennett, Katie, and Anthony. She called 911 to share the shocking details of his actions. The police quickly began searching for Steven, who had driven away from the double murder. As investigators understood the severity of the situation, the search for Steven intensified. After hanging up the phone, Steven drove to a remote area in Dover, New York, where he parked his minivan. Overwhelmed by the gravity of his actions, he realized he could not escape the consequences of his violent acts. In a final act of desperation, he took a firearm and ended his own life. The investigation into the murders of Katie, Anthony, along with the death of Bennett, quickly began. The Knightdale and New Milford police departments collaborated to uncover the details of this disturbing case. The investigation started with a welfare check at Steven's home in Knightdale. When police arrived, they found Bennett's lifeless body hidden in a closet. Steven was found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound inside his truck in Dover, 18 miles from the scene of the attacking. When Steven and Katie were arrested on charges of incest, Alyssa was outraged by the court's decision to permit Steven to see Bennett. She felt the system had failed to protect the child, arguing that anyone facing incest charges should never be allowed near minors. Alyssa also pointed out the absence of a psychiatric evaluation for Steven before his release, stressing the importance of mental health assessments in such serious cases. Although there was no trial, the evidence collected during the investigation indicated a pattern of control and manipulation in Steven's relationships with both Katie and Alyssa. The tragic outcome of these dynamics resulted in multiple lives lost and left the community in shock. With Steven's death, there was no trial, verdict, or sentence. Alyssa, while dealing with her own guilt and grief, continued to raise awareness about domestic violence and the complexities of family abuse. She stressed the importance of recognizing the signs of manipulation and control in relationships, aiming to prevent similar tragedies in the future. The aftermath of this case serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences that can arise from unchecked family relationships and the critical need for vigilance in protecting vulnerable individuals from harm. The Stephen and Katie Plattel case ignited a wave of shock and outrage across social media and news platforms. Many expressed disbelief at the tragic circumstances that led to the murders and subsequent suicide, questioning how such manipulation and abuse could escalate to such violence. Commenters criticized the legal system for failing to protect the innocent, particularly in light of the evident signs of abuse. Alyssa Platt, Katie's biological mother, became a voice for the victims, lamenting the systemic failures that allowed this tragedy to unfold. The case sparked discussions about the need for better mental health evaluations and protective measures for vulnerable individuals. The disturbing case of Stephen and Katie Plattel came into focus in an episode titled Murders in the Family from the true crime series Sex, Lies, and Murder. This episode delved into the complex dynamics of their incestuous relationship, exploring how Stephen's abusive past and manipulative behavior led to tragic outcomes. Through chilling reenactments and interviews, the episode examined the emotional turmoil faced by the victims and the systemic failures that allowed the abuse to escalate. Unfortunately, it serves as a haunting reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked manipulation and family violence. The case of Stephen and Katie Plattel is a harrowing testament to the devastating consequences of unchecked manipulation, abuse, and family dysfunction. Their relationship went awry and turned into a tragedy that claimed the lives of Katie, her adoptive father Anthony Fusco, her infant son Bennett, and Stephen himself, leaving a trail of grief for their loved ones. The case, seared into public consciousness through media coverage and true crime stories, serves as a stark reminder of the destructive power of control and the importance of addressing domestic violence before it escalates into irreversible loss. The Plattel family's story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about family dynamics and advocates for reforms that prevent such horrors from happening again.